Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Mythical Astronomy Daenerys Fan Worship Hour. Oh, no, it's not that. We're here to discuss Daenerys with an impartial and... no, we're not. We're here to defend her honor. I always go back and forth with this at the beginning. Joining me is Melanie Lot7. Say hello, Melanie.
Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be back on with you, David. And yeah, I am ready to talk about Dany and slavery and yeah.
Right on. Well, yes, we're here to talk about slavery. That's for sure. This is Dany's, just to outline basically her Storm of Swords arc has 6 chapters. The first one is the one where she is on the ship and decides to change course to Slaver's Bay. That's actually Jorah's advice, but they were going to sail to Pentos on Illyrio's 3 ships, and Jorah says, let's go to Slaver's Bay. So that's the first chapter. Second one, she gets an Astapor, takes stock of the Unsullied and the slave masters in general. It's a big horror shock for the reader and for Dany. Third chapter, she negotiates with the slave masters and then pulls the entire Dracarys move where she turns the Unsullied against the masters and, you know, takes Astapor. Chapter 4 is the taking of Yunkai, which they do with some sellsword trickery. If you remember, she invites all the sellswords out, including Daario. Daario kills the leader, the other 2 people of the... Is it not Second Sons? What's Daario's company? Brave Companions? I don't know. Not Brave Companions. I don't know.
No, he's not. It's not the Brave Companions.
It's not. They're all sellswords, but Stormcrows.
There we go. Okay, thank you.
Daario's and Stormcrows. In any case, that one they did through trickery. They said, 3 days, and then she attacked at night. They took it with very little casualties. Chapter 5 is the taking of Meereen, which they do by sending Jorah and Barristan, the traitor knights, through the sewer, and they break out the slave pits and actually start a genuine slave revolt. They free the pit fighters who are slaves, and they join the fighting, and they free the more slaves, and they basically attack the soldiers from behind, and they take Meereen. And then chapter 6 is the Meereen fallout, where Dany is, seeing what's happened, and she decides to stay and rule instead of moving on. So we are going to spend by far most of the time on the first 3 chapters, because that starts the entire discussion of Dany taking Slaver's Bay, upending the social order, and how she uses her dragons and all that stuff. We'll probably only get a little bit to the stuff after that. There's less to discuss, and also it sort of runs into the Dance with Dragons arc, which is basically the entire Dance with Dragons arc is her ruling in Meereen. So what I'm saying is we're going to basically get up to that Dracarys moment. We're going to take our time with all that stuff. I've got plenty of notes on just those first 3 chapters. And then we'll see what we get to after that, depending on how much time we have. I might roll some of that into the Dance with Dragons stream, a couple weeks from now. So that's the outline. And yeah, people are commenting that you're dressed like the Witcher today, Melanie.
Oh, there we go. I was actually just typing a comment back. And I was going to ask if they had seen the video that you just put out. That is, can I say what it is, like, without spoiling it for everybody?
Oh, there's no spoiling it.
Okay, yeah, making fun of The Witcher and just using it as like a Game of Thrones Witcher mashup. And it's like the funniest thing. I was dying when I was watching it.
Well, I do want to be clear that I don't mean it as a sort of any slight on The Witcher. The Witcher is cool and everything. It's just fun. I tortured it horribly and rearranged all the plot and just grabs. Basically, what I'm actually, if I'm riffing on anything, it's the fact that all fantasy uses the same archetypes. And so you can turn any promised prince with dark hair into Jon Snow, or you can,
totally,
on and on and on. But obviously we didn't get a good, actually Will Scolding would have been a decent Rhaegar. It was more the wig and the camera angle that ruined it. The guys actually would have done okay.
So bad. Like, everybody knows the wig was what really killed it.
It was disappointing. So Witcher is the Rhaegar that we didn't get, but thank you everyone who's watched the video. It's going over really well. I'm getting lots of nice comments. I do like to do absurd comedy. I mean, Monty Python is what I was raised on. So, it's kind of, my mind is bifurcated between very serious thoughts and completely absurd thoughts pretty much. So it's nice to do something ridiculous. I do have some more ideas to do more ridiculous videos, but I'm keeping all that under wraps. Each video will be a surprise when I do it. So that's all I'm going to say. Hey, everyone in the chat. And last thing I'll say before we dive in is that we have a new little feature today. If anybody wants to send in a super chat, I have sound effects queued up. So I'll just put it at that. Once we get a super chat coming in, then you'll see what the sound effects are. Just trying to make it a little more fun. But
it's super fun.
Let's go ahead and get started. And we are going to go, the first two books that we covered of Dany's, I did them sort them by themes, as opposed to the linear order of the action. For this one, we are going to go linear order of the action, chapter by chapter, just because each chapter is so different. And we've already introduced the themes, so now it's easy for me to say, okay, here's a little bit of empathy, here's a little bit of wisdom and judgment, here's a little bit of dragon identity, and we can sort of mix it all in at the same time because we know what the 3 or 4 major threads that we're following are here. So that sounds good. Then we will get started with Dany 1. Again, she's on the boat, and they are becalmed. It starts off with 6 days, there's been no wind, and Dany's thinking about her love of the sea. She's expressing her admiration for fishermen, and she's actually thinking back to a discussion she had with Viserys about how she liked being, she liked the fishermen and the smell of the sea. And Viserys does the famous, "You're a dragon, not some smelly fish." And then we get this passage.
He was a fool about that, and so much else, Dany thought. If he had been wiser and more patient, it would be him sailing west to take the throne that was his by rights. Viserys had been stupid and vicious, she had come to realize, yet sometimes she missed him all the same. Not the cruel, weak man he had become by the end, but the brother who had sometimes let her creep into his bed, the boy who told her tales of the 7 kingdoms and talked of how much better their lives would be once he claimed his crown.
And we have a super chat from Ball the Bard, 666. Oh, it's a mini theremin. Where'd that come from? I promise I won't overdo it. I'll just put that out there right now. I didn't
realize that was a theremin. Oh my gosh, I'm done.
Definitely won't overdo it. Anyways, thank you, Ball the Bard. Did you have a question, Ball? No, she just wanted to get the party started. All right, so there we go. All right. So we just had, like I said, Dany, basically showing a little bit of perspective. And the key here is that she says, if Viserys had been wiser and more patient. So wisdom and patience are virtues that Dany is seeking to cultivate, in other words. She's also realizing that Viserys was foolish not to see the virtue in, quote unquote, simple jobs like being a fisherman. And this ties into Dany seeing different levels of society and not thinking of herself as a noble who's above everyone, like Viserys does. So that's just a nice little bit there. And then there's a little bit of strategy that she does. A lot of the stuff that I was filing under, quote, wisdom and judgment basically amounts to the way that she deals with Jorah and Barristan in this chapter. So there's a couple different conversations she's basically having with Jorah, and Jorah is expressing doubts about Illyrio, Barristan, and Belwas. And the conversation gives us a lot of insight into Dany's thinking. So go ahead and take it away, Mel.
And unmuting myself really helps. Sir Jorah watched with a frown on his blunt, honest face. Mormont was big and burly, strong of jaw and thick of shoulder. Not a handsome man by any means, but as true a friend as Dany had ever known. You would be wise to take that old man's words well salted, he told her when Whitebeard was out of earshot. Whitebeard. A queen must listen to all, she reminded him. The highborn and the low, the strong and the weak, the noble and the venal. One voice may speak you false, but in many there is always truth to be found. She had read that in a book. Hear my voice then, your grace, the exile said. This Arstan Whitebeard is playing you false. He is too old to be a squire and too well-spoken to be serving that oaf of a eunuch. That does seem queer, Dany had to admit. Strong Belwas was an ex-slave bred and trained in the fighting pits of Meereen. Magister Illyrio had sent him to guard her, or so Belwas claimed, and it was true that she needed guarding.
So after being becalmed for days, the wind picks up and everyone is happy. It even says that Belwas gave a great bellow and did a little dance, which is fun to picture. And then the conversation continues.
The gods are good, Dany said. You see, Jorah? We are on our way once more. Yes, he said. But to what, my queen? All day the wind blew, steady from the east at first, and then in wild gusts. The sun set in a blaze of red.
I'm still half a world away. I'm still half a world from Westeros, Dany reminded herself, but every hour brings me closer. She tried to imagine what it would feel like when she first caught sight of the land she was born to rule. It will be as fair a shore as I've ever seen, I know it. How could it be otherwise? But later that night,
Jorah shows up with more talk of Whitebeard, Belwas, Illyrio, and strategy in general.
Dany gave the dragons the rest of the salt pork to squabble over and patted the bed beside her. Sit, good sir, and tell me what is troubling you. 3 things, Sir Jorah said. Strong Belwas, this Arstan Whitebeard, and Illyrio Malpatis, who sent them. Again? Dany pulled the coverlet higher and tugged one end over her shoulder.
So the point I'm trying to make here is that Dany, once again, listens to good advice, even if she starts out thinking that the advice giver is kind of just haranguing her or being overprotective. You know, she's aware of Jorah's crush by this point, so she's factoring in that level of bias. But none of that is enough to override her actual good judgment. Her personal feelings are not, she's able to put those aside and still consider. And of course, that's really important because one of the things we're looking for is if Dany is in the process of attacking Westeros, we're looking for this moment where she realizes that using dragons, you know, just to conquer is probably not what she needs to do and will result in more damage than she wants to. And so she needs to be able to listen to people. It was a very stiff plot line in the show where she wouldn't listen to anyone. And of course, it's ridiculous that Tyrion was the good angel on her shoulder when Book Tyrion is heading down the dark path and will likely encourage Dany towards more violence. But I assume there'll be someone around like Missandei or maybe Barristan will probably be dead by then. But hopefully there'll be somebody around to give Dany good advice that she'll need to listen to. Or maybe it'll just be her own good judgment. But you guys see what I'm going for here. She's using good discernment. Have anything you want to add on that?
Me? No. I was just noticing that there was a $5 super chat, though.
Oh, my goodness. It's Alicia Patience. Do you think Dany frees the slaves to make herself feel good? I feel good. I don't hear that argument a lot. What do you mean by make herself feel good? That's, I would say, follow up and elaborate, but we are going to get to I would say there's 2 reasons why she frees the slaves. One is that she needs an army, and 2 is that it amounts to bringing justice. And she defines, we're going to talk about how she defines honor and justice and leadership, but there's a passage that boils it right down as far as what her motivations is. So thank you, Elisa, and we will elaborate on that question here shortly. All right. So we've got, all right. So the next, so the next bit here, what happens is Jorah basically continues on, summing up a bunch of Jorah, basically. He continues on about Illyrio and trusting people. He's a little bit pedantic, and he's suggesting that Belwas and Whitebeard, you know, might have staged the incident with the sorrowful man and the manticore. It's an inside job. Which Dany sort of laughs off, and Jorah persists, and he points out, hey, look, these are Illyrio's ships, Illyrio's captains, Illyrio's sailors. Strong Belwas and Arstan Whitebeard came from Illyrio. Dany points out that Illyrio is a friend to House Targaryen, but Jorah challenges that, and he says, Illyrio loves only gold, cares only about himself. You remember that line where it said, Illyrio would have sat on the dragon eggs himself if he had thought they would hatch, which I think is endlessly hilarious. And so he's, you know, Jorah points out that Illyrio is devious and clever, to which Dany responds.
Sorry, I'm having trouble muting and unmuting. I need clever men about me if I'm to win the Iron Throne. Sir Jorah snorted. That wine seller who tried to poison you was a clever man as well. Clever men hatch ambitious schemes. Dany drew her legs up beneath the blanket. You will protect me. You and my blood riders. 4 men? Khaleesi, you believe you know Illyrio Malpatis very well, yet you insist on surrounding yourself with men you do not know, like this puffed-up eunuch and the world's oldest squire. Take a lesson from Pyat Pri and Zarozohan Daxos. He means well, Dany reminded herself. He does all he does for love. It seems to me that a queen who trusts no one is as foolish as a queen who trusts everyone. Every man I take into my service is a risk. I understand that. But how am I to win the 7 kingdoms without such risks? Am I to conquer Westeros with 1 exile knight and 3 Dothraki blood riders? His jaw set stubbornly. Your path is dangerous. I will not deny that. But if you blindly trust in every liar and schemer who crosses it, you will end as your brothers did. His obstinacy made her angry. He treats me like some child. Strong Belwas could not scheme his way to breakfast. And what lies has Arstan Whitebeard told me? He is not what he pretends to be. He speaks to you more boldly than any squire would dare. Mom. Sorry, hang on just a moment.
So picking up right there, let's see, speaks to you more boldly. Where was we? He spoke frankly at my command. He knew my brother. And then Jorah says, a great many men knew your brother, your grace. In Westeros, the Lord Commander, a great many men knew your brother. And then he says, your grace. In Westeros, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard sits on the small council and serves the king with his wits as well as his steel. If I am the first of your Queen's Guard, I pray you, hear me out. I have a plan for you. So then he lays out the plan, and this is a pretty important turning point in the arc. So Mel, if you are back, go ahead and read this paragraph.
Yes, sorry. Just for the record, my child was having a play date, and they're doing some stuff.
And Mel, as I mentioned earlier, if you need to jump out at any point, I can very easily pick it up. So don't even feel bad or hesitate. You have
so
small
much.
humans. I do not have small humans. So yeah, feel free to jump out whenever. Just let me know. But
sure.
Go ahead.
Okay, here we go. Illyrio Mapadis wants you back in Pentos under his roof. Very well, go to him. But in your own time, and not alone. Let us see how loyal and obedient these new subjects of yours truly are. Command Grolio to change course for Slaver's Bay. Dany was not certain she liked the sound of that at all. Everything she'd ever heard of the flesh marts in the great slave cities of Yunkai, Marine, and Astapor were dire and frightening. What is there for me in Slaver's Bay? An army, said Ser Jorah. If strong Belwas is so much to your liking, you can buy hundreds more like him out of the fighting pits of Marine. But it is Astapor I'd set my sails for. In Astapor you can buy unsullied. Right size.
Mom. Mom, lot 7. That works. Thank you, Melanie, for that excellent reading. So what we've got going on here is essentially the change of the plans. And after describing how fierce the Unsullied are and saying nothing about the cruelty that goes into training them, by the way, only like completely glossing over that. And he tells the story of the 3,000 who defended Qohor, which is very impressive, bloody. And he finishes up, he says, that is what you will find in Astapor, your grace. Put ashore there and continue on to Pentos overland. It will take longer, yes, but when you break bread with Magister Illyrio, you will have 1,000 swords behind you, not just 4. There is wisdom in this, Dany thought. How am I to buy 1,000 slave soldiers? All I have of value is the crown the Tourmaline Brotherhood gave me. Dragons will be as great a wonder in Astapor as they were in Karth. It may be that the slavers will shower you with gifts as the Kartheen did. If not, these ships carry more than your Dothraki and their horses. They took on trade goods at Karth. I've been through the holds and seen for myself. Bolts of silk and bales of tiger skin. I want some tiger skins. Amber and jade carvings. Saffron, myrrh. Actually, no, I don't. Those would not be free trade at all. Anyways, they sound cool, though. Slaves are cheap, your grace. Tiger skins are costly. Those are Illyrio's tiger skins, she objected. And Illyrio is a friend to House Targaryen. All the more reason not to steal his goods. What use are wealthy friends if they will not put their wealth at your disposal, my queen? Magister Illyrio would deny you, then he is only Zarozo and Naxos with 4 chins. And if he is sincere in his devotion to your cause, he will not begrudge you 3 shiploads of trade goods. What better use for his tiger skins than to buy you the beginnings of an army? That's true. Dany felt a rising excitement. There will be dangers on such a long march. There are dangers at sea as well. Corsairs and pirates hunt the southern route, and north of Valyria, the smoking sea is demon-haunted. The next storm could sink or scatter us. A kraken could pull us under. Or we might find ourselves becalmed again and die of thirst as we wait for the wind to rise. A march will have different dangers, my queen, but none greater. What if Captain Grolio refuses to change course, though? And Arstan, strong Belwas, what will they do? So Jorah stood. Perhaps it's time you found that out. Yes, she decided. I'll do it. So pretty exciting moment there. And again, I'm pointing out that Dany starts off, Jorah on again about Belwas and Arstan, but then he actually has a good idea, and like her ears prick up and she listens and recognizes a good plan. And he's right. He's like, let's see what Illyrio is all about. Because Illyrio kind of participated in selling Dany to the Dothraki. Like, why should Dany trust Illyrio and think that Illyrio has her best interest at heart? So this is pretty smart. And, the only thing is that, again, Jorah doesn't tell Dany what the Unsullied really are and what goes into that. And we see in the next chapter, it's very much like a bucket of very cold water and blood that's sort of dumped on her head. Maybe not the best analogy, but it's a big surprise because she's not prepared for it. So
a bad surprise. Some surprises are good. This was a bad surprise.
It was a bad surprise. So here we are. We're turning around. We're going to turn tiger skins into an army. There's a little, before we get to the next chapter, there's a cool little passage regarding the conceptualization of dragons. And yeah, go ahead and read this a little bit.
They are my children, she told herself. And if the Magi spoke truly, they are the only children I'm ever like to have. He was always hungry, her Drogon. Hungry and growing fast. Another year or perhaps 2, and he may be large enough to ride. Then I shall have no need of ships to cross the great salt sea. But that time was not yet come. Rhaegal and Viserion were the size of small dogs. Drogon only a little larger, and any dog would have outweighed them. They were all wings and neck and tail, lighter than they looked. And so Daenerys Targaryen must rely on wood and wind and canvas to bear her home.
And so you can see a couple of things there. She's thinking about Westeros as home. We followed the idea that home originally was just a safe place, the house with the red door, and Viserys was the one dreaming of Westeros. Gradually, they sort of merged, and now she thinks about Westeros as her home and going to Westeros as going home. And also she's thinking about her dragon as her children. And she's also contemplating the fact that she probably will never have living children. And that sort of feeds into the idea that she's going to be a mother to lots of people instead of her specific children, small humans, such as Melanie has created. She will be the Mysa, the mother to lots of people, all the slaves that she'll free. So she's pondering the meaning of the 3 heads of the dragon and what, because that came in the House of the Undying. She got 3 heads has the dragon, and she's kind of turning over all the Undying stuff in her head as she goes along. And we get a quote about what that means.
Your Grace, he conceded. The dragon has 3 heads, remember? You have wondered at that, ever since you heard it from the warlocks in the House of Dust. Well, here's your meaning. Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar, ridden by Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya. The 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen. 3 dragons and 3 riders. Yes, said Dany, but my brothers are dead. Rhaenys and Visenya were Aegon's wives as well as his sisters. You have no brothers, but you can take husbands. And I will tell you truly, Daenerys, there is no man in all the world who will ever be half so true to you as me.
I love the little sort of insinuation in that line. Not half so true as me, because that's about how true Jorah is like half true. Like he does like Dany, and he does gradually shift his loyalties over to Dany, but he doesn't mention anything about,
oh, I'm not spying upon you, and I'm not being, rewarded for that or anything.
Melanie, I was thinking about Jorah as a writing device. Obviously he serves as an adjunct to Dany primarily.
Sure.
So think about this, right? You're creating the Daenerys character. You're George Martin, and you need a one Westerosi sidekick, right? So occasionally pipe in about Aerys or drop little bits of knowledge about
Westerosi history or something.
Exactly. But instead of just making that person just like just a suit or a patsy, he came up with Jorah, like this very complex, this very complex character. Really, like I've been paying a lot of attention to it. He's easy to despise. Obviously, he's got a lot of failings, and he's very self-centered. So there's a lot to like judge and look down on. But again, just as writing a character, he's an interesting character, and he has a lot of depth. And it all leads up to that moment where Dany has to decide whether or not to like banish him. And it's very, it's a tough decision, So
Yeah, I mean, like, Jorah, creepy as he may be, he's very useful to Daenerys. And once his loyalties do shift over to her, he's very, he's insightful and he gives good counsel to her. And so, yeah, I love that George decided to, he's just so good at making a great character. He made this character that you want to root for because you want to root for Daenerys as well. But at the same time, you don't want to root for him because he's creepy. And yeah, it's complicated. Jorah is complicated.
Yeah, and like, for example, the difference between how Jorah and Barristan handle the apology to Dany after they take Meereen and they slink through the sewers. Barristan is very contrite and Jorah is not. And
I feel like Jorah is not afraid to shy away from the ugly side of things, the ugly side of war. He understands that war has costs, but he also doesn't shrink away from it. Barristan Selmy is somewhat like that, but he also has kind of like this veil of honor that he kind of divides him from seeing the common folk or the true cost of war in the way that I think Jorah sees it. And I wonder how much Jorah's own banishment has to do with that. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to get too far off track here.
No, I've been waiting for you to get going. The people want more. The people love you, man. The people love you. And if you're just filing in, we're just getting started. We started about 15 minutes late, so you're just in time. We're just getting rolling with the. We've got a bird sighting.
Yes, we do. This is my tiny dragon. He's looking a little like he wanted some attention. So hi.
Hey, buddy.
Tiki.
Hey, Tiki. So, yes, bird fever is spreading throughout the. So like I said, if you're just coming in, do me a favor, click the like button real quick. That does help. And on your way out, remember to leave a little comment. But getting back to the text, we just covered the first chapter. I'm seeing a bunch of people just jumped in. That's why I'm doing a little recap here. And yes, so we just did the first chapter. We're heading to Slaver's Bay now. And this is, we're going to start getting into the meat of it. One other thread that we're going to follow through this book is Dany starting to learn about her history. It's very slow rolled. Viserys has given her a very one-sided view. He told her that the Mad King label was purely propaganda used against her father as just slander. So she's not aware that Aerys was a Mad King or any of that. And her knowledge about that grows in this book and A Dance with Dragons. So there's a passage here where she's talking to Arston Whitebeard.
Sure. Viserys talked of those skulls, said Dany. The usurper took them down and hid them away. He could not bear them looking down upon him on his stolen throne. She beckoned Whitebeard closer. Did you ever meet my royal father? King Aerys II had died before his daughter was born. I had that great honor, your grace. Did you find him good and gentle? Whitebeard did his best to hide his feelings, but there they were, plain on his face. His grace was often pleasant. Often? Dany smiled, but not always. He could be very harsh to those he thought his enemies. A wise man never makes an enemy of a king, said Dany. Did you know my brother Rhaegar as well?
And then regarding Rhaegar, and I'm just going to skim through this a little bit, Melanie, here, because it's a long quote. The sword of the morning, said Dany, delighted. Viserys used to talk about his wondrous white blade. Said Sir Arthur was the only knight in the realm who was our brother's peer. And Whitebeard bows his head and says, it's not my place to question the words of Prince Viserys. King, Dany corrected. He was a king, though he never reigned. And he says, Sir Jorah named Rhaegar the last dragon once. He had to have been a peerless warrior to be called that, surely. Your grace, said Whitebeard, sort of stammering. The Prince of Dragonstone was a most puissant warrior, but... Go on. You may speak freely to me, as you command. He leaned upon his hardwood staff. A warrior without peer. Those are fine words, your grace, but words win no battles. Swords win battles, Sir Jorah said bluntly, and Prince Rhaegar knew how to use one. As a young boy, the Prince of Dragonstone was bookish to a fault, and this is Barristan talking. Excuse me, Arston Whitebeard. He's in disguise, remember. He was reading so early that men said Queen Rhaella must have swallowed some books in a candle whilst he was in her womb. Rhaegar took no interest in the play of other children. The ministers were awed by his wits, but his father's knights would jest sourly that Baelor the Blessed had been born again, until one day Prince Rhaegar found something in his scrolls that changed him. No one knows what it might have been, only that the boy suddenly appeared early one morning in the yard as the knights were donning their steel. He walked up to Sir Willem Darry, the master-at-arms, and said, I will require sword and armor. It seems I must be a warrior. And he was, said Dany, delighted. He was indeed, Whitebeard bowed. My pardons, your grace. And he gets off. So, yeah, so we're getting a little bit here. It's kind of a 1-2 punch. She's starting to understand that, Aerys was a bit harsh. But Rhaegar, well, yeah, what a fellow. He was smart and he was a good soldier. So it's kind of this two-headed thing that's developing. And we noticed in the House of the Undying that she sees Aerys on his throne commanding the city to be burned, and then Rhaegar, playing his harp and composing the Song of Ice and Fire. So, yes, very much a 1-2 kind of a thing there.
Oh no, I'm not going to be able to handle thinking about Rhaegar's harp anymore. You do realize it's just not going to happen. I
absolutely ruined it. Let me just take a quick second, by the way. If you see this license plate that says streamer, this is the license plate I had on my car when I was 19. And I had nothing to do with YouTube at all. I had a red Mitsubishi 3000 GT, which is a completely irresponsible car for a 19-year-old to own. I had it for about 1.5 years before I accumulated so many speeding tickets I had to sell it because the insurance was as much as the car payments. But I dug these license plates out of a box the other day and was like, whoa, that's kind of funny because I'm a streamer now. And so I thought I'd hang it up. That's the story. Anyways, yeah, I wish I still had it. The thing was smooth, man. I got it used, so I didn't pay all that. Anyways, let's get back to Daenerys. We're heading to the second chapter now, and she's arrived in Astapor, and it's going to be a series of shocks. She's basically getting the lowdown on the slave trade, and let's see here. Here we go. I'll just do that until she comes back. We get the lowdown on the slave trade and the Unsullied. It's basically one horror after another. And we'll start here. So in the center of the Plaza of Pride stood a red brick fountain whose waters smelled of brimstone. And in the center of the fountain, a monstrous harpy made of hammered bronze. 20 feet tall she reared. She had a woman's face with gilded hair, ivory eyes, and pointed ivory teeth. Water gushed yellow from her heavy breasts. But in place of arms, she had the wings of a bat or a dragon. Her legs were the legs of an eagle. And behind, she wore a scorpion's curled and venomous tail. A harpy of geese, Dany thought. Old geese had fallen 5,000 years ago, if she remembered true, its legions shattered by the might of young Valyria, its brick walls pulled down, its streets and buildings turned to ash and cinder by dragon flame, its very fields sown with salt, sulfur, and skulls. The gods of geese were dead, and so too its people. These Astapori were mongrels, so Jorah said. Even the Giscari tongue was largely forgotten. The slave cities spoke the high Valyrian of their conquerors, or what they had made of it. So Dany is standing in the center of the Plaza of Pride in front of the slavers that she's about to talk to. But she's looking up at this harpy. And she's thinking about how the Valyrians kicked its ass a long time ago, right? And then we get a bit of foreshadowing when the slaver tells Daenerys to lower her eyes. So check out this quote. I deal in meat, not metal. The bronze is not for sale. Tell her to look at the soldiers. Even the dim purple eyes of a sunset savage can see how magnificent my creatures are, surely. And that's basically the entire plot in a nutshell. Dany does look to the slave soldiers, but when she does, she sees them as a way to get that ugly harpy, to free the slaves, to upend the masters, in other words, to end the grotesque practice of slavery, of turning humans into quote-unquote creatures. So before we get into Slaver's Bay and the slave-driven society and economy there, and the Unsullied in particular, it's worth considering the context of the very idea of a Targaryen who wants to free slaves, since the Targaryens descend from old Valyria, which was a slave empire that used the unrivaled power of dragons to basically grind humans into dust for 5,000 years, erasing entire nations and cultures at a time. None of this had been revealed to the reader yet. We don't start to find out about the horrors of the Valyrian Empire until A Feast for Crows, when Arya hears the tale of the first faceless man. And although it's not explicitly stated that Dany knows this history at this point in the story, we can pretty much assume that she does. The fact that she's aware of Valyria's wars with old geese means that she knows the basics of Valyrian history and would thus be aware of how Valyria used their dragons. So Tyrion sums up the Valyrian slave empire succinctly in A Dance with Dragons by saying, An empire built on blood and fire. The Valyrians reaped the seed they had sown. But here is the head faceless man explaining their history to Arya from A Feast for Crows. And this is where we really find out what they're up to.
The tale of our beginnings. If you would be one of us, you had best know who we are and how we came to be. Men may whisper of the faceless men of Braavos, but we are older than the secret city. Before the Titan rose, before the unmasking of Uthero, before the founding, we were. We have flowered in Braavos amongst these northern fogs, but we first took root in Valyria amongst the wretched slaves who toiled in the deep mines beneath the 14 flames that lit the freehold's nights of old. Most mines are dank and chilly places cut from cold dead stone, but the 14 flames were living mountains with veins of molten rock and hearts of fire. So the mines of old Valyria were always hot, and they grew hotter as the shafts were driven deeper, ever deeper. The slaves toiled in an oven. The rocks around them were too hot to touch. The air stank of brimstone and would sear their lungs as they breathed it. The soles of their feet would burn and blister even through the thickest sandals. Sometimes, when they broke through a wall in search of gold, they would find steam instead, or boiling water or molten rock. Certain shafts were cut so low that the slaves could not stand upright but had to crawl or bend. And there were worms in that red darkness too. Earthworms? She asked, frowning. Fireworms. Some say they are akin to dragons, for worms breathe fire too. Instead of soaring through the sky, they bore through stone and soil. If the old tales can be believed, there were worms amongst the 14 flames even before the dragons came. The young ones are no larger than the skinny arm of yours, but they can grow to monstrous size and have no love for men. Did they kill the slaves? Burnt and blackened corpses were oft found in shafts where the rocks were cracked or full of holes. Yet still the mines drove deeper. Slaves perished by the score, but their masters did not care. Red gold and yellow gold and silver were reckoned to be more precious than the lives of the slaves. For slaves were cheap in the old freehold. During war, the Valyrians took them by the thousands. In times of peace, they bred them, though only the worst were sent down to die in the red darkness. Did the slaves rise up and fight? Some did, he said. Revolts were common in the mines, but few accomplished much. The dragon lords of the old freehold were strong in sorcery, and lesser men defied them at their peril. The first faceless man was one who did. Who was he? Arya blurted before she stopped to think. No one, he answered. Some say he was a slave himself. Others insist he was a freeholder's son born of noble stock. Who knows? Whoever he was, he moved amongst the slaves and would hear them at their prayers. Men of 100 different different nations labored in the mines, and each prayed to his own god in his own tongue, yet all were praying for the same thing. It was release they asked for, an end to pain, a small thing and simple. Yet their gods made no answer, and their suffering went on. Are their gods all deaf? He wondered, until a realization came upon him one night in the red darkness. All gods have their instruments, men and women who serve them and help work their will on earth. The slaves were not crying out to 100 different gods, as it seemed, but to one God with 100 different faces, and he was that God's instrument. That very night, he chose the most wretched of the slaves, the one who had prayed the most earnestly for release, and freed him from his bondage. The first gift had been given. Arya drew back from him. He killed the slaves? That did not sound right. He should have killed the masters. He would bring them the gift as well. But that is a tale for another day, one best shared with no one.
So this is great. Thank you. Well read, Melanie. It sounds like Arya might like Dany a little better than show Arya did. Kill your masters indeed. They're on the same page, I would say. This line encompasses the total inversion of Dany's use of draconic power, more importantly. When Arya hears about the extreme cruelty of the Valyrian Empire, she says that someone should have killed the masters. And by the end of the story, she's going to meet a dragon lord who uses her dragons to kill the masters. As I've mentioned before, I believe that the others and the whites are to be seen as a magical extension of the entire slave master theme that runs through the books. and Dany's defeat of the others, which will amount to freeing the whites from eternal bondage so their souls and bodies can finally rest, should be seen as the culmination of her kill the masters and free the slaves arc. But that's all in the future, of course. So let's jump back to Slaver's Bay, where Dany's first chapter there in Slaver's Bay is in Astapor, is all about her and we, the reader, learning about the horrific way in which the Unsullied are created and the general slave society which exists there. This occurs through a conversation that Dany has with the good master, slaver Kraznys Monaklas. All throughout, if you remember, the slaver is insulting Dany with incredibly vulgar and demeaning language, most of which I will avoid quoting, but I'm sure you recall. He's mostly using derogatory sex worker terminology. He's insulting her intelligence as a Westerosi savage, that kind of thing. He's getting away with it because if you remember, Dany is choosing to endure it in order to gain an advantage, which she does by a clever stratagem. It's not intended, but go ahead and start with Kraznys.
Sorry, I was reading. I was reading up in the chat, and really good comments, you guys. I love this stuff about Tyrion. I think it's really on point. The good master Kraznys asks, "Are they not magnificent?" The girl spoke the common tongue well for one who had never been to Westeros. No older than 10, she had the round, flat face, dusky skin, and golden eyes of Na. The peaceful people, her folk were called. All agreed they made the best slaves. They might be adequate to my needs, Dany answered. It had been Sir Jorah's suggestion that she speak only Dothraki in the common tongue while in Astapor. My bear is more clever than he looks. Tell me of their training. The Westerosi woman is pleased with them, but speaks no praise to keep the price down, the translator told her master. She wishes to know how they were trained. Kraznys, I always have trouble with his name. Kraznys Monaklas bobbed his head. He smelled as if he'd bathed in raspberries, this slaver, and his jutting red-black beard glistened with oil. He has larger breasts than I do, Dany reflected. She could see them through the thin sea-green silk of the gold-fringed tokar he wound around his body and over one shoulder. His left hand held the tokar in place as he walked, while his right clasped a short leather whip. Are all Westerosi pigs so ignorant? He complained. All the world knows that the Unsullied are masters of spear and shield and short sword. He gave Dany a broad smile. Tell her what she would know, slave, and be quick about it. The day is hot.
So this is a pretty clever plan here, and one that Dany skillfully uses to manipulate the slavers. However, we should also keep in mind, like I said, Jorah's given a very one-sided version of reality when he sold her on the idea of coming here. So she has to, she's experiencing a series of shocks and revulsions that she's got to like, excuse me, suppress and keep off of her face. That's sort of the bit that's going here. So slowly the full horror unfolds. I think I wanted to make a quick remark though about the tokar. If you remember, the tokar is a pretty clever thing that George came up with because it literally has to be held in place by one hand. So like the whole point of the garment is that you can't do any work while you're wearing it. So it's like, it's a very good encapsulation of the class divide that exists in Slaver's Bay. I just wanted to highlight that. Yeah, also that's super sexy, guys. That whole description of his breasts under the silk. I mean, that's just, it's hot. It's hot. Anyways, the day is hot. That's what it meant. Yeah, so it's a clever plan. And, so here we go. We're talking about the Unsullied. And first comes Dany's observation of the Unsullied as brick soldiers with stony eyes. And later she calls them dead eyes.
If the Unsullied felt the heat, however, they gave no hint of it. They could be made of brick themselves, the way they stand there. 1,000 had been marched out of their barracks for her inspection, drawn up in 10 ranks of 100 before the fountain and his great bronze harpy. They stood stiffly at attention, their stony eyes fixed straight ahead.
So the reveals of the Unsullied training basically go from bad to worse to is there no God? And here's the next part.
They are chosen young for size and speed and strength, the slave told her. They begin their training at 5. Every day they train from dawn to dusk until they have mastered the short sword, the shield, and the 3 spears. The training is most rigorous, Your Grace. Only 1 boy in 3 survives it. This is well known. Among the Unsullied, it is said that on the day they win their spiked cap, the worst is done for no duty will ever fall to them that could be as hard as their training. Which is horrible to think. Ugh.
So, all right, exactly. We've got boot camp for 5-year-olds. All right, that's messed up. 1 in 3 survives. That's messed up. It's not optional. That's, they're all slaves to begin with. And then it gets worse. You'll notice the way that Kraznys calls Missandei slave instead of by her name. Think about that. Missandei is incredibly skilled and is performing a very valuable service for Kraznys, which goes well beyond translation. She's a negotiator, a politician, and a diplomat, and she's only 10. And Kraznys can't even use her name. So just to give you an idea of like the dehumanization that's going on here. Anyways, we see more Missandei mistreatment coming up, and then talk of the Unsullied's obedience.
Kraznys Monacla supposedly, Kraznys Monacla supposedly spoke no word of the common tongue, but he bobbed his head as he listened, and from time to time gave the slave girl a poke with the end of his lash. Tell her that these have been standing here for a day and night with no food nor water. Tell her that they will stand until they drop if I should command it, and when 999 have collapsed to die upon the bricks, the last will stand there still and never move until his own death claims him. Such is their courage. Tell her that.
So Arston names it madness as opposed to courage. And Dany reflects that, he was against this entire operation, which is actually the reason that Dany brought him along. She brought him to be a dissenting voice in the room. Let me just skim this one. The old man had not wanted to sail to Astapor, nor did he favor buying the army, but a queen should hear all sides before reaching a decision, and that's why she brought him. So she mentioned that a couple times. The queen should listen to all voices. So I just think that's kind of a cool thing. She brings along the team of rivals, if you will. His action is going on here. Fans of Abe Lincoln and Barack Obama. So more good judgment and wisdom. And then what happens next is that Dany walks down the line of Unsullied to have a closer look, taking a moment to empathize with the fact that they have no protection from the heat, because Dany's a decent person. She notices they are of all races, including Giscari, and that they, but even though they're from, she notices that they are of all races, including Giscari, meaning that they sell their own into slavery, but they all, quote, have the same eyes, no matter the color, and that they are indeed like one man, except for that they're eunuchs. So Dany asks then why they are cut, when eunuchs tend to be weaker than men who have penises, I guess. And Kraznys says that, yeah, this is true, but...
The Unsullied have something better than strength, tell her. They have discipline. We fight in the fashion of the old empire, yes. They are the lockstep legions of old Gis come again. Absolutely obedient, absolutely loyal, and utterly without fear. Dany listened patiently to the translation. Even the bravest men fear death and maiming, Arston said when the girl was done. Kraznys smiled again when he heard that. And I'm sorry, I just have to say, I can just imagine that it's like the greasiest smile in the world. Ugh. Tell the old man that he smells of piss and needs a stick to hold him up. Truly, your worship? He poked her with his lash. No, not truly. Are you a girl or a goat to ask such folly? Say that the Unsullied are not men. Say that death means nothing to them and maiming less than nothing.
So some of Kraznys' insults are actually pretty funny in a certain way. The goat one was pretty funny. And, again, he's a filthy slaver, but I like the writing here anyways. The conceit of him hurling insults that he doesn't think Dany can understand and that he doesn't actually want translated is actually a really brilliant writing choice, because it shows us how vain he is. He can't just keep it in. He's got to run his mouth and stuff, even though it's serving no purpose at all. It's just so that he can hurl insults that he won't actually go anywhere. So it just kind of shows us the ego and the arrogance of the slaver, as well as being a little bit ridiculous. And it's like that. But what's not funny is when Kraznys begins abusing the Unsullied, of course, to demonstrate their pain tolerance and obedience. And I will spare you the nipple wounding quote. Don't worry, we're not going to read that. But it's important to note that Dany has difficulty controlling herself when he begins to whip the Unsullied. You're muted. Oh, we had a super chat, actually. Let me just back up real quick.
Sure, yeah.
It's from Christopher, who says, "Thanks for the great content." Thank you, Christopher. Oh, did the bird like that one?
apparently the bird also liked that. Yes.
I had Goose was copying. I'll get him on a stream one time, but go ahead.
You totally should. Okay, going forward. He stopped before a thick-set man who had the look of Lazar about him and brought his whip up sharply, laying a line of blood across one copper cheek. The eunuch blinked and stood there bleeding. "Would you like another?" asked Kraznys. "If it please, your worship." It was hard to pretend not to understand. Dany laid a hand on Kraznys' arm before he could raise the whip again. "Tell the good master that I see how strong his Unsullied are, and how bravely they suffer the pain."
Yeah, I'm throwing all kinds of comments up while you're reading. Don't just ignore me. So George is hitting several beats throughout this discussion, if you notice. Dany's empathy and Dany's wisdom compared to the slaver's cruelty and the suffering of the slaves themselves. Round and round, all those points are being hit throughout this entire conversation. The slaver begins maiming another Unsullied, and Dany cries out, "What is he doing to Missandei?" And what Kraznys is doing is demonstrating that the Unsullied feel almost no pain because, as it turns out, they have been drinking the wine of courage, which is no true wine at all, but made from a deadly nightshade, bloodfly larva, black lotus root, and many secret things. Sorry, I've got Roy Dotrice's very strange Kiskari accent in my head.
Bloodfly larvae.
Sounds good. They drink it with every meal from the day they are cut, and with each passing year, they feel less and less. It makes them fearless in battle, nor can they be tortured. Kraznys goes on about how the Unsullied have no penis as well as no testicles, and that therefore not tempted by sex. The dehumanization of the Unsullied is what's emphasized here, with Kraznys saying that they are completely wed to their swords in a way that no other man can be, and he later compares them to Valyrian steel, beaten and hammered and folded thousands of times. That the Unsullied, they're not tempted by loot or plunder or rape, and that they don't even get to have names. You recall that they have to draw their names from a hat every day. Names like Grey Worm, Blue Toad, Brown Flea, Black Rat. And this is done because it, quote, reminds them they're like vermin. Then comes even more horror. And we're going to read this one just to reconnect with the visceral feeling of revulsion that we are supposed to feel along with Dany as she makes her next moves.
"More madness," said Arstan when he heard. "How can any man possibly remember a new name every day? Those who cannot are culled in training, along with those who cannot run all day in a full pack, scale a mountain in the black of night, walk across a bed of coals, or slay an infant." Dany's mouth surely twisted at that. Did he see? Or is he blind as well as cruel? She turned away quickly, trying to keep her face a mask until she heard the translation. Only then did she allow herself to say, "Whose infants do they slay?" To win his spiked cap, an Unsullied must go to the slave marts with the silver mark, find some wailing newborn, and kill it before its mother's eyes. In this way, we make certain that there is no weakness left in them. She was feeling faint. The heat, she tried to tell herself. You take a babe from its mother's arms, kill it as she watches, and pay her for, oh gosh, sorry. Oh, darn it. I just lost my spot. I went all the way down to the bottom.
It's only one paragraph. I'll just pick it up.
Okay,
When the translation was made for him, Kraznys laughed aloud. "What a soft, mewling fool this one is. Tell the W word of Westeros that the mark is for the child's owner, not the mother. The Unsullied are not permitted to steal." He tapped his whip against his leg. "Tell her that few ever fail that test. The dogs are harder for them, it must be said. We give each boy a puppy on the day he is cut. At the end of the first year, he is required to strangle it. Any who cannot are killed and fed to the surviving dogs. It makes for a good, strong lesson, we find. Barf, barf, barf." Okay, so here we have the full horror of the Unsullied laid bare. And ask yourself how you feel right now.
Nauseated?
Right. And now check out Barristan's response and take careful note of what Dany's very next words are after hearing about these final details of the vile practice that is making of the Unsullied. I noticed on the last reread that she is hatching a plan to free the Unsullied literally the second after she hears all this crap. So go ahead and read this next bit.
Arstan Whitebeard tapped the end of his staff on the bricks as he listened to that. Tap, tap, tap. Slow and steady. Tap, tap, tap. Dany saw him turn his eyes away, as if he could not bear to look at Kraznys any longer. The good master has said that these eunuchs cannot be tempted with coin or flesh, Dany told the girl. But if some enemy of mine should offer them freedom for betraying me, they would kill him out of hand and bring her his head. Tell her that, the slaver answered. Other slaves may steal and hoard up silver in hopes of buying freedom, but an unsullied would not take it if the little mare offered it as a gift. They have no life outside their duty. They are soldiers, and that is all. It is soldiers I need, Dany admitted. Tell her it is well she came to Astapor then. Ask her how large an army she wishes to buy. How many unsullied do you have to sell?
So she phrases her first question as, what if someone offers them freedom? Will they betray me? But what she's really asking is the reverse. If I offer them freedom, will they betray you? So hearing that they will not, she realizes she likely has to find a way to, quote, buy them in order to free them, which is, again, already what she's thinking about. So her next question is, how many unsullied do you have to sell? Because she is going to want to buy them all, to free them all. As the conversation is ending, it says Dany knew she would take more than 100 if she took any at all. And then real quick, we had a super chat from Pat Riley, who says, but she burns the slaver. Yes, she does. We're going to get to that dramatic reading in just a minute. Yes, we are. Thank you, though. All right. So finally, to reinforce the idea that she is serious, Dany says, remind your good master of who I am. Remind him I am Daenerys Stormborn, mother of dragons, the unburnt, true-born queen of the 7 kingdoms of Westeros. My blood is the blood of Aegon the Conqueror and of old Valyria before him. And it says, yet her words did not move the plump, perfumed slaver, even when rendered in his own ugly tongue. Old Gis ruled an empire when the Valyrians were still fucking sheep. He growled at the poor little scribe, and we are the sons of the Harpy. So nice little pissing match there. And it kind of reinforces the dragon versus Harpy, Valyria versus Gis theme that is running through these chapters. In the past, the dragon and the Harpy both played the Game of Thrones, if you will, causing immense suffering for everyone else. But now, Dany is indeed breaking that wheel, if you will, by being an aspiring High Lord who uses their power to aid people. So we can feel good rooting for the dragon here in round 2, actually round 6.
Can I break in just for a second here and just point out, okay, so something that you've been talking about on these Dany streams is how perceptive she is. And I think that this is a really good example, another good example of how perceptive Dany is versus how not perceptive the slaver is, because the slaver hasn't figured out that she can speak his language, that she knows every single word that he's saying. You know, a perceptive person might have a chance at noticing those things, especially when, you know, her face kind of betrays her in one of the quotes that we just read. Oh, hi. And I think this is like another really good way that George is pointing out that, you know, Dany is very perceptive and in this case kind of tricky too.
Yep, she plays it really well. And we're going to talk about exactly what she's doing, but she's giving the slavers a certain idea of her, which she's going to use to their advantage. But people are hitting the buzzer today. D.D. Villano. Hi, Melanie. Hi, Lamel. Great read. Thank you. Thank you. And we've got Sheila Hamilton, a little offering to my favorite dude. I'm assuming the Burb is the favorite dude, but I'll take it. And you know what? I can even change the sound of this thing. That super chat was a little bigger, so we gotta
ramp it up.
All right, that's there. I can already see the comments on the YouTube video. Dude, just talk about A Song of Ice and Fire. Quit playing with your little theremin thing. Sorry, it's my show. All right, so. Thank you, Sheila. We'll see if this leads to more or less super chats. I guess that'll be the judge. But yeah, the chat is pretty much all Burb, so that's cool. Hopefully you guys are listening to some of this. I don't know. Whatever. It's cool.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Oh no.
I did not mean to steal any thunder.
It's the hair, man. The hair, dude. The hair is just, you can't, you know. We should do a whole bird stream, I guess, one time. I don't know.
We should definitely do a bird stream. Mm-hmm. I mean, Yeah, this bird is like nothing compared to your dragons. So, you know.
So like I said, Dany is breaking that cycle, okay? So let's give a quick shout out for Miss Sanday's translation skills here. She turns, "I will feed her jellied dog brains and a fine rich stew of red octopus and unborn puppy," he wiped his lips, into, "Many delicious dishes can be had here," he says. Okay? She turns, "Tell her how pretty the pyramids are at night," the slaver growled. "Tell her I will lick honey off her breasts or allow her to lick honey off of mine if she prefers." And Miss Sanday turns that into, "Astapor is most beautiful at dusk, your grace," said the slave girl. "The good masters light silk lanterns on every terrace, so all the pyramids glow with colored lights. Pleasure barges ply the worm, playing soft music and calling at the little islands for food and wine and other delights." So it's
I mean, for a 10-year-old, she's like a prodigy, number one, to know all those languages and to be such an excellent diplomat. Like, seriously, this child is remarkable and does not get enough credit. And in a way, I'm kind of sad that the show aged her up so much, because I think it takes away some of the extraordinary aspects of her character, because I think that she is amazing and probably is one of my favorite B-level characters.
Yeah, she really is. It might be slightly unrealistic how capable she is for a 10-year-old, but I don't know, maybe somewhere out there.
Prodigy level, yeah.
Yeah, she is a prodigy level. I mean, I guess those people do exist. She's like Doogie Howser. She's damn smart. She is amazing, very good character. Totally different as far as on the show and the book, but yeah, there you go. So real quick, I will just say I saw a comment about Patreon names. Guys, I'm cooking up a little something called a Patreon music video. It's one of my like 7-minute spacey sound effect music compositional things. I don't even know what to call it, but you know, my little acid trip sound effect tracks that I have on my SoundCloud. I took a good one and I took some images from the show that I like and some starry, spacey footage and scrambled it together. And basically what I'm saying is that if you are a patron of mine, message me and make sure that I have your nickname. And if you can, would be super helpful, you can actually change your Patreon title to your actual nickname. Because I have this giant document, Melanie, that's like a list of every patron and then a list of all the nicknames, and I constantly have to cross-reference it. And I am not very good at that kind of stuff. So if you can change your Patreon name to your Patreon name, that will help me. And if you can send me a little message, no, I'm not a SoundCloud rapper. I'm a SoundCloud effects pyromaniac. But like I said, send in your names so that I can, because on the music video, I'm gonna read them over in a spooky space voice while the images play. And I want to get everybody a chance to be on there. So in any case, back to the programming. Yes, so real diplomatic skill from Miss Sanday. It's the opposite of an anger translator, right?
Yes, sorry. It is absolutely. It's like the positive, calm translator, like taking ugly messages and making them beautiful.
Yeah, that last one was a real miracle. So let's see. This part of the scene rather closes with yet more examples of the slaver's cruelty and Dany continuing to manipulate him with her ruse.
"Ask her if she wishes to view our fighting pits," Kraznys added. "Dohor's pit has a fine folly schedule for the evening. A bear and 3 small boys. One boy will be rolled in honey, one in blood, and one in rotting fish, and she may wager on which the bear will eat first." Tap, 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 Dany heard. Arstan Whitebeard's face was still, but his staff beat out his rage. Tap, tap, tap. She made herself smile. "I have my own bear on Balerion," she told the translator, "and he may well eat me if I do not return to him." "See," said Kraznys when her words were translated, "it is not the woman who decides, it is this man she runs to as ever." "Thank the good master for his patient kindness," Dany said, "and tell him that I will think on all I learned here." I love that, like, passive-aggressive.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, we had a super chat. Ainsley, Michael John Griffiths, 449. Really enjoying the Dany chat. Thank you. Where were we? The Dany chat. That's right. I put, by the way, the SoundCloud link in the chat, and I'll put it in the description. If you, yeah. What I'm really hoping is that somewhere out there, Melanie, there's somebody making an indie film that needs terrifying, like Cthulhu space warp music. And they'll stumble across my SoundCloud and be like, dude, this is perfect.
This is perfect.
And then, yeah, so that I feel is the ultimate use of what I'm doing here. But
in any case, perfect. A perfect match.
So Kraznys tosses in a little bit of patriarchy at the end. Oh, aha, I knew there was a man that she runs to. And Dany's doesn't even flinch. She says, thank the good master for his patient kindness and tell him I will think on all I learned here. So Dany's just playing it straight face. She's just absorbed all this horror. So keep in mind, like inside of her is a raging fire of anger and disgust. And she's still playing it straight. I don't think I could have done this, Melanie. I'm way too impatient and like transparent as far as my emotions go. I mean, it's pretty.
Yeah, there's no way that I would have been able to handle that situation without like wanting to just like jump across and strangle the guy. Like, seeing that much injustice. And yeah, slavery and I do not mix too well. Not at all. And yeah, Dany's patience and restraint are A++, because yeah, I think that, I mean, like, what does the chat think? Do you think that you could watch that happen in front of you, watch a guy's nipple get cut off and a guy get lashed with a whip and just like stand there and be okay with it? It takes a great amount of restraint. I mean, Dany's okay with it, I think, because she understands that she has a greater purpose here, and those actions would counter her plan, but still, like, I don't know if I'd have that much restraint, even if I did have a bigger plan in mind.
Yeah, it's definitely not Viserys. It's not even Fagon. Pick up my chess pieces, dwarf. It's none of that. There's no like. It's not. She doesn't like. She has a temper, but it's like a slow burn temper. It's more of the anger against injustice as opposed to a momentary like fits of rage. Like she really doesn't pick up my pieces, dwarf. Sorry. She doesn't do that. She doesn't flip the chessboard. So, Trugon. #Trugon. I did you like my Fagon cameo in the Rhaegar show video? I thought that was pretty good. Like, it didn't really work for me. It's sort of thrown in. Anyways, as I tell my jokes again. Okay, so like I said, she is pretty impressive. And then as they're leaving the Plaza of Pride, there's a nice beat that highlights Dany's sense of the weight of the situation. And Jogo says, "Make way!" Jogo shouted as he rode before her litter. "Make way for the mother of dragons." But when he uncoiled the great silver-handled whip that Dany had given him and made to crack it in the air, she leaned out and told him nay. "Not in this place, blood of my blood," she said in his own tongue. "These bricks have heard too much of the sound of whips." So just thought that was a nice little, just nicely written little bit to where she's like, no, I don't even want to hear the sound of a whip here. Because the whip is very much serving as a symbol. She considers it when she holds it. Kraznys is holding it. It's made of dragon bone, and it has these gold talons, which are called the Harpy's fingers. And Melanie, I was thinking about that symbolism for a second. Mm-hmm. Valeria was a slave empire. Mm-hmm. Gis was a slave empire. Mm-hmm. And so we have this slave whip made up of dragon bone and the harpy claws. Mm-hmm. So it's very much a symbol of both of that, all that history. But then here comes a different kind of dragon who tosses it and drops it in the dust.
Absolutely, a dragon that has talons and is made, has dragon bone inside of it. But the symbol is much different than the living, breathing thing. And the Dany's dragons are really just the avatar of that power. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really like the touch that the hilt is dragon bone, because it's like the Valyrians had a part in this too. It's not all the Giscari. We shouldn't blame all the slavery on the Giscari. The Valyrians established the slave trade for 5,000 years, and they created a slave trade economy that persisted after their empire crumbled. So they're a part of this too, and that's what I think the message is there. So a moment later, we read, go ahead and do the bricks and blood.
"Bricks and blood built Astapor," Whitebeard murmured at her side, "and bricks and blood her people." "What is that?" Dany asked him, curious. "An old rhyme a Meister taught me when I was a boy. I never knew how true it was. The bricks of Astapor are red with the blood of the slaves who make them." "I can well believe that," said Dany. Then leave this place before your heart turns to brick as well. Sail this very night on the evening tide. Would that I could, thought Dany. When I leave Astapor, it must be with an army, Sir Jorah says.
So then Arston says that they can hire sellswords in the free cities, to which Dany replies, my brother visited Pentos, Mir, Bravos, near all the free cities. The magisters and archons fed him wine and promises, but his soul was starved to death. A man cannot sup from the beggar's bowl all his life and stay a man. I had my taste in Karth, and that was enough. I will not come to Pentos bowl in hand. Arston says, better to come a beggar than a slaver. There speaks one who has been neither. Dany's nostrils flared. Do you know what it is like to be sold, squire? I do. My brother sold me to Khal Drogo for the promise of a golden crown. Well, Drogo crowned him in gold, though not as he had wished. And my sun and stars made a queen of me. But if he had been a different man, it might have been much otherwise. Do you think I have forgotten how it felt to be afraid? Whitebeard bowed his head. Your grace, I did not mean to give offense. Only lies offend me, never honest counsel. Dany patted Arston's spotted hand to reassure him. So this is what I was saying about Dany's temper. Like, she lets a little bit of it out here appropriately, but doesn't let it control her, and then, sort of moderates it by saying it's okay. Only lies offend me. So interesting line, because, and it just shows you like Dany's got some emotion here. This wasn't that long ago. She hasn't had time to process all of that. So this is still an active wound inside of her. That feeling of losing your autonomy, she remembers, it's fresh in her mind. And so this passage sort of communicates a little bit of that passion. And, she's, like I said, she's right to point out that she was lucky, essentially, to develop a decent relationship with Drogo, which eventually gave her agency, and that many people in her position would have had it far worse. It just would have been straight marital rape with no increasing agency and no moderation, no sympathy or whatever. So
absolutely agree on that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's important to note that Dany understands that. Like, she appreciates that it could have been worse, and that it is worse for most other people in her position. So she doesn't give in to rage like Viserys did, but sort of mitigates her harsh words, like I said, which is, just she's managing Barristan well here. So Jorah, however, he did not give her honest counsel. And so she gives more of her rage to him. Because like I said, Jorah did not prepare her and let her walk right into all of this. And so here is the quote of her chewing out Jorah.
Sir Jorah Mormont stood waiting for her. Your grace, he said, bowing his head. The slavers have come and gone. 3 of them, with a dozen scribes and as many slaves to lift and fetch. They crawled over every foot of our holds and made note of all we had. He walked her aft. How many men do they have for sale? None. Was it Mormont she was angry with, or this city with its sullen heat, its stinks and sweats and crumbling bricks? They sell eunuchs, not men. Eunuchs made of, I guess he doesn't like that word. Eunuchs made of brick, like the rest of Astapor. Shall I buy 8,000 brick eunuchs with dead eyes that never move, who kill suckling babes for the sake of a spike hat and strangle their own dogs? They don't even have names, so don't call them men, sir. Khaleesi, he said, taken aback by her fury. The unsullied are chosen as boys and trained. I have heard all I care to of their training. Dany could feel tears welling in her eyes, sudden and unwanted. Her hand flashed up and cracked Sir Jorah hard across the face. It was either that or cry. Mormont touched the cheek she'd slapped. If I have displeased my queen, you have. You've displeased me greatly, sir. If you were my true knight, you would never have brought me to this vile sty. As your grace commands. I shall tell Captain Grolio to make ready to sail on the evening tide for some sty less vile.
I love that line right there, by the way. It's so funny.
No, said Dany. Grolio watched them from the forecastle, and his crew was watching too. Whitebeard, her blood riders, Jiki, everyone who had stopped what they were doing at the sound of the slap. I want to sail now, not on the tide. I want to sail far and fast and never look back. But I can't, can I? There are 8,000 brick eunuchs for sale, and I must find some way to buy them. And with that, she left him and went below.
So then a bit later, evening on the ship, as dust settled over Slaver's Bay, she's standing by the rail, and she's looking at Astapor. From here, it looks almost beautiful. The stars were coming out, silk lanterns, bloody. But she says, but it is dark below in the streets and plazas and fighting pits, and it is darkest of all in the barracks, where some little boy is feeding scraps to the puppy they gave him when they took away his manhood. So all this is fresh in her mind. And to get back to that question we had of why she frees the slaves, like George is giving you the insight right here. Follow what her train of thought. Follow what she's thinking about and what's moving her. So then Jorah comes up behind her meekly, may I speak frankly, said Dany did not turn. She could not bear to look at him now. Say what you will, sir. When Aegon the Dragon stepped ashore in Westeros, the kings of Vale and Rock and Reach did not rush to hand him their crowns. If you mean to sit the Iron Throne, you must win it as he did, with steel and dragon fire, and that will mean blood on your hands before the thing is done. Blood and fire, Dany thought. The words of House Targaryen. She had known them all her life. The blood of my enemies I will shed gladly. The blood of innocence is another matter. 8,000 unsullied they would offer me. 8,000 dead babies. 8,000 strangled dogs. Your Grace, said Jorah Mormont, I saw King's Landing after the sack. Babes were butchered that day as well, and old men and children at play. More women were raped than you can count. There is a savage beast in every man, and when you hand that man a sword or a spear and send him forth to war, the beast stirs. The scent of blood is all it takes to wake him. Yet I have never heard of these unsullied raping, nor putting a city to the sword, nor even plundering, save at the express command of those who lead them. Brick they may be, as you say, but if you buy them henceforth, the only dogs they'll kill are those you want dead. And you do have some dogs you want dead, as I recall, the usurper's dogs. So you can see the driving forces here. She needs soldiers, and these soldiers happen to serve the cruelest masters imaginable and seem like they could use a bit of liberating. So need and empathy and a desire to right injustice, in other words, are all coming together. The idea that the Unsullied aren't the type to rape and pillage is basically a bonus, and may help mitigate the potential hostility that Westeros will have for quote-unquote foreign soldiers. It probably helps Dany lock on to the idea that, yes, she really should try a way to find these soldiers, as they would be effective, they'll be well-controlled, because you remember, she's constantly worried about the Dothraki and the dragons laying waste to Westeros up to now, because she doesn't want that, right? Because she doesn't want to turn Westeros into a charnel pit. Okay, thanks anyways. So after Dany expresses her emotion over the cruel treatment of the Unsullied, she switches gears and then begins asking Jorah questions that are designed to help her refine her evolving plan. And again, this is the one, too, that shows us her thinking. She's thinking about the kids with the puppies and all of that. And then she pivots to start asking Jorah questions about forming her plan. So go ahead and take it away.
Sorry, I was interacting with the chat. We were getting a little bit ahead of ourselves and talking about the educated slaves that later on Dany has to deal with. But that's something that I'm like chomping at the bit to discuss. Okay. You speak of sacking cities. Answer me this, sir. Why have the Dothraki never sacked this city? She pointed. Look at the walls. You can see they've begun to crumble. There and there. Do you see any guards on those towers? I don't. Are they hiding, sir? I saw these sons of the Harpy today. All their proud, high-born warriors. They dressed in linen skirts, and the fiercest thing about them was their hair. Even a modest Khalasar could crack this Astapor like a nut and spill out the rotten meat inside. So tell me, why is that ugly Harpy not sitting beside the God's Way in Vaes Dothrak among the other stolen gods? You have a dragon's eye, Khaleesi. That's plain to see. I wanted an answer, not a compliment. There are two reasons. Astapor's brave defenders are so much chaff, it's true. Old names and fat purses who dress up as Giscari scourges to pretend they still rule a vast empire. Everyone is a high officer. On feast days, they fight mock wars in the pits to demonstrate what brilliant commanders they are. But it's the eunuchs who do the dying. All the same, any enemy waiting to sack Astapor would have to know what they'd be facing. That they'd be facing Unsullied. The slavers would turn out the whole garrison in the city's defense. The Dothraki have not ridden against Unsullied since they left their braids at the gates of Qohor.
All right, well read. Thank you. That was a nice long passage. So put a pin in that real quick. Got a super chat from Funerals, Lord of Grave Rapist. That's a very strange name, but Lucifer means Lightbringer. I know you worked a lot about symbolism, especially about astrology and alchemy. So I wondered, how much do you know about Carl Jung's work? Sorry about the digression. Not that much, probably embarrassingly little. I am mostly self-educated. I didn't do the standard college literature class that would have given me like the basics and like all the standard stuff. So I've filled in my education piecemeal. I only know Jungian terms from like very layman's parlance. I haven't read anything. I don't really understand it. So I would not be qualified to sort of get into that discussion. But it sounds like the kind of thing I should know about. Melanie, do you have anything to say about this?
If I could unmute myself and get rid of my crazy children in the background. I actually know a lot more about Freud than I do Jung, and I don't really know why. I did take some basic psychology courses, and apparently my teachers were skewed more toward Freud than Jung. So no, I can't really speak to it either, and I'm really sorry. And I'm going to be right back.
Okay, but hit me up on Twitter at the Dragon LML and start a little discussion, and somebody that knows about it will pipe in and we'll all get educated together, because it's kind of like the good thing about how Twitter works. So, all right. And we will get to, so we just read a long quote. Again, my point was that Dany is she's forming her plan. This is not something that okay, wait, all the bards piping in here. So let me actually get this. Jung worked a lot in archetypes. Explanations of a lot of the mythic storytelling archetypes go back to his work. Oh, I see. Okay, that makes sense. Well, then I definitely should learn me up some Jung. I should. And of course, I got to, one of my questions got answered by George Martin at a recent event in Chicago at the end of last year. Not the end of last year, I guess like two months ago. And yeah, in any case, the video is up. It's on YouTube. And I will find it and put it in the description or drop it in the chat. But my question was about his use of myth and archetypes in the story, and he gave a pretty interesting and thoughtful answer. So, yeah, I'll have to go and study up that, because archetypes, increasingly, I'm seeing archetypes as just of paramount importance as far as writing goes. And it's the kind of thing that if D&D had paid more attention to, themes, archetypes, the show might have had more consistency and the characters might have had more consistency. But there you go. Scott McCloy says he just watched that last night. Ball the Bard, I bet you could find the link. It is yeah, oh gosh, is it the Library of Chicago, or who is it that hosted the event? Anyways, we'll get it for you in a second. Back to the matter at hand. And back to Melanie. We're talking about Dany formulating the plan. So like I said, on the reread, it really stuck out to me. It stuck out to me how early on Dany is formulating the plan. Like I said, as soon as she hears about the cruelty, she's asking questions about, will they turn on me? Basically, she's trying to figure out, can I use them against you somehow? If I offer them freedom, will they turn on you? Okay, well, if I buy them, can I then use them against you? But she's asking all those questions in reverse to disguise her true intent, and saying, will they turn on me if someone tries to turn them against me or whatever? So it's very, very clever. And the part here that she's asking is twofold, right? She says she's asking about why the Dothraki have never sacked Astapor, because she's thinking about sacking Astapor. And so she's asking Jorah, without giving away her plan, what the reasons are. So essentially, the first one is that the Unsullied themselves are the primary physical defense of the city. The walls are basically shit, but anybody who attacks the city knows they'd be attacking Unsullied. Nobody wants to mess with Unsullied. However, if Dany can gain control of the Unsullied, then there's nothing stopping her from using them to sack Astapor and free the slaves, except for the second point. So here's the second bit is, before we get to that, right, I did want to highlight this line, which I think is a total boss line, Melanie. Absolutely love it. So tell me, why is that ugly harpy not sitting beside the God's Way in Vaes Dothrak among the other stolen gods? Like, isn't that what we do here? Don't we tear down these fucking idols and like drag them back to Vaes Dothrak? Like, why have we not done this? So
a little snark. I like it too.
I like the energy there. Yeah. So then this is the mama dragon energy. Her empathy. She's already adopting basically any downtrodden person that she comes across as her child. She's already thinking about the slaves and the young boys and thinking about defending them somehow, because that's her archetype. She is the mama dragon. So here is the second reason why nobody ever sacks Astapor.
And the second reason, Dany asked? Who would attack Astapor? Sir Jorah asked. Meereen and Yunkai are rivals, but not enemies. The Doom destroyed Valyria. The folk of the eastern hinterlands are all Giscari, and beyond them, and beyond the hills lies Lazar. The Landmen, as your Dothraki call them, are notably unwarlike people. Yes, she agreed. But north of the slave cities is the Dothraki Sea, and 24 mighty cows who like nothing more than sacking cities and carrying off their people into slavery. Carrying them off where? What good are slaves once you've killed the slavers? Valyria is no more. Karth lies beyond the Red Waste, and the 9 free cities are thousands of leagues to the west. And you may be sure the sons of the Harpy give lavishly to every passing cow, just as the Magisters do in Pentos and Norvos and Myr. They know that if they feast the horse lords and give them gifts, they will soon ride on. It's cheaper than fighting, and a deal more certain. Cheaper than fighting, Dany thought. Yes, it might be. If only it could be that easy for her. How pleasant it would be to sail to King's Landing with her dragons and pay the boy Joffrey a chest of gold to make him go away.
Thank you, Pat Riley. He fell out of his chair trying to pet his cat, so I had to give him especially like a lurchy sound for that. But you can follow Dany's thinking pretty easily here. 2 things are protecting the slavers: the Unsullied, who she's about to take control of, and the slave trade itself. But here's the thing. Dany has no desire to preserve the slave trade. In fact, she has just the opposite. What good are slaves once you've killed the what good are slaves once you've killed the slavers? Jorah asks. But Dany is thinking the exact reverse. What need have we for slavers if we don't need slaves anymore? And the answer is none. So if she can wrest control of the Unsullied from the Masters, there is literally nothing preventing her from toppling the Masters from power. And this is why the strategy of pretending not to understand Valyrian speech and playing it cool has worked out so well. The slavers are assuming that Dany thinks like a Dothraki cow, and that she may want to buy more Unsullied in the future, or sell captives to them that she'll take as slaves in the future. And so they're overconfident, and they don't see the dragon's wrath coming. This passage is from a 3rd chapter, as the good masters give Dany advice about the Unsullied right before they do the deal. And they're saying, and should she take captives, a few guards will suffice to march them back to Astapor. We'll buy the healthy ones. And who knows, in 10 years, some of the boys she sends us may be Unsullied in their turn. So they completely, just like you said, Melanie, they completely did not pick up on her revulsion. And they're assuming that she'll be happy to help them make more Unsullied. So.
Whoops, there we go. Yeah, totally. They are not seeing they think they're just doing, the regular business deal, like you say. And yeah, they've got another thing coming.
They do. And so I think George is really doing a marvelous job of giving us just enough to follow Dany's thinking and guess her plan, but without revealing all the way what's coming, so that it hits as a big surprise when it happens. And on the first read, I really didn't see it coming, but on the reread, like I said, you can see it starting right from the plaza that she's planning this out. So the other thing that's happening in this chapter is the Rhaegar. And no, I'm not talking about my smash hit Rhaegar Witcher mashup parody video, although you should check that out if you haven't already. No, I'm talking about Dany being compared to Rhaegar all through the act of taking the Unsullied from the good masters. It's especially heavy in the 3rd chapter that we're about to get to, but it begins here with Jorah's famous "And Rhaegar died" speech.
Dany shrugged him off. Viserys would have bought as many Unsullied as he had the coin for. But you once said I was like Rhaegar. I remember, Daenerys. Your Grace, she corrected. Prince Rhaegar led free men into battle, not slaves. Whitebeard said he dubbed his squires himself and made many other knights as well. There was no higher honor than to receive your knighthood from the Prince of Dragonstone. Tell me then, when he touched a man on the shoulder with his sword, what did he say? Go forth and kill the weak, or go forth and defend them? At the Trident, those brave men Viserys spoke of who died beneath our dragon banners, did they give their lives because they believed in Rhaegar's cause, or because they had been bought and paid for? Dany turned to Mormont, crossed her arms, and waited for an answer. My queen, the big man said slowly. All you say is true. But Rhaegar lost on the trident. He lost the battle. He lost the war. He lost the kingdom. And he lost his life. His blood swirled down river with the rubies from his breastplate, and Robert, the usurper, rode over his corpse to steal the Iron Throne. Rhaegar fought valiantly. Rhaegar fought nobly. Rhaegar fought honorably. And Rhaegar died.
And Rhaegar died. Somebody's saying, I could have called my Witcher Rhaegar video the Rhaegar-er, which I like. Yes. And because I add LET to anything that's small, like a parrotlet. You know, they have a thing called a parrotlet. So marmoset-let or, yeah, piglet-let. Anyways. So what we have here is a bit of a fake out, if you will, from George, who's trying to make us think that Dany's going to consider something less honorable, something that Rhaegar wouldn't have done, which would be buy slave soldiers and thus make herself complicit in the slave trade and the practice of making Unsullied. Because think about it, George could have had her done that. Like she just buys the Unsullied and tries to rationalize it by saying, well, I'm going to treat them better. So, you know, it's okay that I'm buying them. But if you think about it, she's giving money. She would have been giving money to the slavers, which they would use to make more Unsullied. So she would have been complicit in the entire thing if she had done that. And I think that's what George is trying to, like I said, sort of mislead us here. He's saying, well, Rhaegar was honorable and he died. So if you don't want to die, you got to do something a little bit less honorable. But of course, Dany finds a third choice. And the key here is that Dany is distilling down the entire question of knight's honor, which George explores elsewhere in entire characters like Jaime, Brienne, Sandor Clegane, and Ser Barristan, down into one simple question, which is, are knights meant to defend the weak or to slaughter them? I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right? Did you want to break in?
Oh, no, I'm just wholeheartedly agreeing because I think that that's like the central, just like you said, it's a central question. I love that George, this is like one of the things I love about George's writing the most is that he puts these moral questions, he puts them to us and he does it in a way that causes us to really think about it, to slow down and think about it and to take in viewpoints that we necessarily wouldn't think of by giving us these characters that are exceptional or think differently from us. And saying, you know, like just Davos's question and the question that you just asked. That's something that I think George does just masterfully in his work.
Yep. And we're going to talk about the idea of Dany's concept of justice as we go increasingly. But this is where it starts in this book, you know, as being a really clear theme. She's asking straight up, you know, what are knights for? So, and she's gonna put that same question to what are kings for in the next question, in the next chapter or two. She's basically going to say that Robert was no true king because he didn't do justice, and she means to do justice. So anyways, my point is that she's basically redefining honor to be something a bit more like human. It's not about nobility or valiance or chivalry, but rather justice. And so Jorah is saying that Rhaegar was noble and valiant, but what Dany is seeking to bring is justice, even if that's ugly and less than noble. So that is the kind of fake out here, is that Jorah is operating on a different continuum of honor versus dishonor than Daenerys is.
Yes, absolutely. He, like I said, he is the guy that has done something dishonest himself. He's a disgraced knight, and he has that perspective to look at this situation and acknowledge the ugliness in what she's going to have to do and look at the ugliness. Oh no, it's okay.
I'm just agreeing with Paul the Bard that the music
it's really horrible.
Yeah, it is. It's really strange. But
sex, like bad music plus sex scenes, like it's not
it
good.
was. It was the first time Geralt and Ashara and Rhaegar hooked up, and it was like very powerful. And all of a sudden, it was like silly medieval, like prancy music, and it was like, what's going on?
Oh yeah, that's bad.
But yes, everyone should watch The Witcher. Again, to be clear, my parody video is not
I tried so
The Witcher. The Witcher is cool. Definitely check it out. It's worth watching. Anything that's halfway decent and fantasy that's on TV, I mean, you guys should be checking out, right? Anyways.
Okay, sorry. I'm done.
Yes. So Yeah, and like I said, we're gonna develop the concept of honor a little bit more here in this third chapter, which is where we are now. So, the first words of Dany 3 are Missandei repeating Dany's words back to her. All, meaning you want to buy all the Unsullied? Go ahead.
I was just rooting for Dany, like, yes. I would, said Dany when the question was put to her. The 8,000s, the 6 centuries, and the ones still in training as well, the ones who have not earned the spikes.
So this makes sense if you understand that Dany's intent is to end the practice of making Unsullied entirely. She wants every boy who has begun the process, even yesterday, even offering to pay double or triple if she can get every boy in training, because she aims to shut this thing down altogether. So, yeah, the body does have a way of shutting it down, I guess. Old joke, that's from a couple years ago. Anyways, this will be the default. This by default will topple the power structure in Astapor and cause a revolution. And we get that information in the next paragraph here. Go ahead. You're muted. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Dany let them argue, sipping the tart persimmon wine and trying to keep her face blank and ignorant. I will have them all, no matter the price, she told herself. The city had 100 slave traders, but the 8 before her were the greatest. When selling bed slaves, field hands, scribes, craftsmen, and tutors, these men were rivals, but their ancestors had allied with one another for the purpose of making and selling the Unsullied. Brick and blood built Astapor, and brick and blood her people.
Yeah, you guys got to watch out with the thirst in the chat. I can put you on blast. Yeah, see? Just like that. This show is pretty steamy, I will say that. Everyone's always taking baths and going to sex parties in between the wizard battles. You saw the video. You know what happens. Anyways, yeah. So, yeah, hit the like button, people, if you could. That would be nice. I appreciate that. So, yes, brick and blood built Astapor. And like I said, so she can see that the 8, if she kills these wise masters, that basically they are the power in the city. They are the most powerful people. So she understands that taking them down is going to be more than just, taking, killing 8 people. Because again, the Unsullied are the primary defense of the city. And so if she takes them, then yeah, Astapor is, going to crumble. It's literally basically Astapor. This is what I'm trying to say. There's 3 cities in Slaver's Bay, but Astapor is the one that makes the Unsullied. Only Astapor. So that is like the primary thing that organizes culture in Astapor, is making the Unsullied. And so when she ends that, it's going to upend the power structure. So she doesn't have anywhere near enough to buy all of the Unsullied. She already knows that, but she draws out the process, allowing them to detail the value of her trade goods and ships, only to get to the heart of the plan. Go ahead.
2,000 would never serve for what she meant to do. I must have them all. Dany knew what she must do now, though the taste of it was so bitter that even the persimmon wine could not cleanse it from her mouth. She had considered long and hard and found no other way. It is my only choice. Give me all, she said, and you may have a dragon.
And you, Maud Mary, may have a... Tossing a coin to my myth head. Thank you, Maud Mary. Appreciate it. So we've got, let's see, what do I want to say about this one? So Secret Agent Stan objects. He's silenced by Dany, who later tells him, hey, feel free to question my wisdom in private, but never do that in public, which is fairly reasonable. And I suspect that she left Barristan in the dark about her plan because his genuine outrage kind of helped her sell the ruse to the slavers. What do you think, Melanie?
Oh, I definitely think that that's why she didn't say anything to him. I do want to point out the idea of this being a very important choice that Dany makes. I think that the theme of choice is something that George likes to discuss a lot, or have us think about a lot. The line, no chance, no choice. Mm-hmm. This is one of Dany's hardest choices. She's, in a way, if everything goes to plan, it's not going to be a hard choice. But if something gets messed up, she's giving up one of what she thinks is her 3 children and basically selling her child into slavery, which is really like a heartbreaking, aching choice. And so for her to have the courage and faith in her own plan really says something. You know, the fact that she's willing to give up a dragon in order to free the Unsullied. I mean, you know, just going back to like the meta point that we're trying to make, that what we're seeing from book Dany is completely different from what happened in season 8. Like, I think that this is another really good example of why book Dany is just like miles and miles away from show Dany. She is giving up one of her extremely priceless, like completely irreplaceable children in order to put the lives of 8,000 Unsullied, or, you know, give or take a few, you know, at ease. And I think that says exactly what we're trying to say about her character. I mean, she's not gonna, if she's willing to give up one of her children to free, you know, I don't want to say like a mere 8,000 people, but you know, if she's willing to do that, that shows us that she is definitely going to think twice about burning King's Landing to the ground, and is probably not going to be triggered by the bells. Like, well, what the heck?
Yeah, again and again, she puts herself on the line for her people. That's it, and it fits in with that train of thought. So yeah. Now Josh Thompson makes a good point, slightly ahead of where we are, but he says the slave masters never asked about whether or not the dragon would obey them, unlike Dany, who made sure the Unsullied would obey her. That is a very good point, because the whole trickery here depends on the idea that the slavers are overconfident that they'll be able to control the dragon. Dany hands them the dragon leash, but Drogon doesn't budge. She takes control of the Unsullied and then says Dracarys, and she knows that the dragon will continue to obey.
The dragon is no slave.
That's right. And she asked all these questions, making sure. So once I have them, I can attack anyone, right? And they're not yours anymore, right? And okay. You know, so because she asked Miss Sande questions too about that as well. So very good point, Josh Thompson. The slave masters were overconfident in many ways and set themselves up for what they got. So let's see here. Oh, yes. So let's throw in just a dash of symbolism. We're still doing character analysis, but there's a little bit of symbolism here. So check out the subtle other symbolism. I'm going to read this one, Melanie. All your gods, save your crown and your queenly raiment, which we will allow you to keep, the 3 ships and Drogon. Done, she said in the common tongue. Done, common tongue. I'm going to start that whole bit over again. All your goods, save your crown and your queenly raiment, which we will allow you to keep, the 3 ships and Drogon. Done, she said in the common tongue. Done, the old Grazdan answered in his thick Valyrian. The others, echoed that old man of the pearl fringe. Done, the slave girl translated, and done 8 times done. So as I mentioned, the idea of Dany slaying the masters and freeing the slaves with dead eyes is foreshadowing of Dany slaying the others and freeing the trapped souls of the whites. So a huge, gigantic mega clue about this, more than just, you know, calling the slave masters the others through others double entendre, comes here in this next passage when Dany tries to sleep later that night and has this dream.
That night she dreamt that she was Rhaegar, riding to the Trident. But she was mounted on a dragon, not a horse. When she saw the usurper's rebel host across the river, they were armored all in ice, but she bathed them in dragon fire, and they melted away like dew and turned the Trident into a torrent. Some small part of her knew that she was dreaming, but another part exulted. This is how it was meant to be. The other was a nightmare, and I have only now awakened. She woke suddenly in the darkness of her cabin, still flushed with triumph. Balerion seemed to wake with her, and she heard the faint creak of wood, water lapping against the hull, a footfall on the deck above her head, and something else. Someone was in the cabin with her. Eerie? Jiki? Where are you? Her handmaids did not respond. It was too black to see, but she could hear them breathing. Jorah, is that you? They sleep, a woman said. They all sleep. The voice was very close. Even dragons must sleep. She is standing over me. Who's there? Dany peered into the darkness. She thought she could see a shadow, the faintest outline of a shape. What do you want of me? Remember, to go north, you must journey south. To reach the west, you must go east. To go forward, you must go back. And to touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. Quaithe? Dany sprung from the bed and threw open the door. Pale yellow lantern light flooded the cabin, and Irri and Jiki sat up sleepily. Khaleesi? Murmured Jiki, rubbing her eyes. Viserion woke and opened his jaws, and a puff of flame brightened even the darkest corners. There was no sign of a woman in a red lacquer mask. Khaleesi, are you unwell? Asked Jiki. A dream. Dany shook her head. I dreamed a dream, no more. Go back to sleep. All of us go back to sleep. Yet try as she might, sleep would not come again. Oh, you're muted. Oh, still can't hear you.
Sorry, I did the mute thing this time. I was just saying we got some compliments on your reading voice, such as this one from Helen O'Grady. I put it up on the screen and I've lost it, but thank you very much. And here's what I want to point out, that this is actually fairly straightforward as far as prophetic symbolic visions go. Okay, so she follow this. She dreams of fighting her own version of the Trident, except that it seems more like a battle against the others, right? Her foes are armored in ice like the others, and they melt under the dragon fire as we expect the others to do, regardless of show canon. This dream may well have been influenced or implanted by Quaithe, of course, who is using a glass candle to project herself into Dany's mind and to, speak to her. As I lose my place. Okay, so yes, Dany's using a glass candle here. I'm not Dany. Quaithe, who wears a mask in this version of the show. She is using a glass candle to project herself into Dany's mind. That's what happens here. When Dany wakes and it feels like Quaithe is in the room and it sounds like she's in the room, but she's not actually there, that's astral projection by means of glass candle. And the point is that, what am I trying to say? It's possible to use glass candles to implant dreams or to mess with people's dreams. We're given that information later. I think it's in A Dance with Dragons. So all of Dany's dreams are somewhat suspect. That's basically what I'm trying to say. However, we should notice that it resonates with Dany. Even if it was sent by Quaithe, when she feels that feeling of melting people with dragons, melting ice-armored warriors, it resonates. This is how it was meant to be. The other was a nightmare, and I have only now awakened, which is more other wordplay. The other was a nightmare. Good thing I have dragons. So it's as if George wants us to think about the others who are nightmares come to life, right as Dany melts ice-armored foes with dragonfire. You guys know how this works. But here's the really big point I want to make. She has this dream of fighting her own battle of the Trident, and then she's about to free the Unsullied and turn them against the Masters, and she's thinking it's time to cross the Trident. So she's comparing this dream of the others to the Trident, and she's comparing freeing the Unsullied to the Trident battle. So if you put them together, what do you have? You have Dany fighting the others and somehow freeing slaves at the same time. And that's exactly what I'm saying is going to happen if she slays the others and it leads to a liberation of the whites, like I'm saying it does, or it will. Because I think that the whites, Melanie, do have some little bit of like their soul trapped in their body. Like it's less of a horror if it's literally just the corpse. But
I absolutely agree with you on that. I mean, George gives us other examples of similar-ish types of things when, when Bran's skin changes, all of the other creatures, and hears the echoes of the other children of the forest that were inside before. I think George is using those examples as a way to like kind of hint that the whites maybe have like that little bit of themselves locked away, kind of like Hodor when Bran takes over his brain.
I think it's probably a lot like that. Yeah.
Same idea.
And at the very least, it's like, let these bodies, rest,
Yeah.
So.
Gosh, they've been through enough, darn it all. They're falling to pieces.
Tony 3483 says, Alyssa Farman as Quaithe would be a god level retcon. Totally agree. Really hope that that's what happens. Love that theory. It really explains why Quaithe is so interested in Dany. So we'll see. We are going to talk about Quaithe more either in the next one, the Dance with Dragons one, or in the sort of symbolism and magic foreshadowing Capper episode that I've got planned. But we will start talking about that. Right here, we should notice something about Quaithe is that notice the sequence of events here. She dreams about slaying the others, and then Quaithe appears and says, well, to go north, you must go south. To go west, you must go east. So just follow that. Again, it's very straightforward. Dany needs to go west and north. So what does that mean? She needs to go to Westeros, and then she needs to go north and fight the others. That's her destiny, the thing she just dreamed about. So it's just, again, more foreshadowing of where Dany's arc is leading to. The pinnacle, the climax of it is going north, not going north and then coming back down to fight Cersei. Like it's going to be King's Landing first and then going north. And I really feel strongly that that is going to be the last part of her arc. So anyways, like I said, and then of course, all this comparison to the Trident is also, again, more of her comparing herself to Rhaegar and all that stuff. So when we return to Astapor here in the chapter narrative, George throws in, besides all the Rhaegar talk, a reference to Aegon the Conqueror after Dany chastises Barristan for questioning her in the middle of negotiations. Go ahead.
I am not a child, she told him. I am a queen. Yet even queens can err. The Astapori have cheated you, your grace. A dragon is worth more than any army. Aegon proved that 300 years ago upon the field of fire. I know what Aegon proved. I mean to prove a few things of my own.
And indeed she does. I think we're also meant to think about what Dany is doing here in Slaver's Bay as instructive as to what she might do in Westeros. To the extent that she conquers Westeros, she will attempt to protect the people as her own, to protect the weak, which, again, will eventually necessitate her throwing all of her dragon power against the others. And that's how we know that she's going to figure that out, because her priority, her whole concept of ruling, is to use power to protect people. So once she gets to Westeros and talks to Jon and realizes the threat that the others pose, her values and her logic dictate that she will then protect the people by going north. And I think Stannis's logic, well, Stannis and Davos's reasoning, is a foreshadowing of Dany's reasoning. So think about it. Stannis is thinking about trying to be king, right? He fails at taking Dragonstone, or taking King's Landing, comes back to Dragonstone and licks his wounds. And Davos finds that letter from the Night's Watch. And then they go north to help the Night's Watch against the wildlings and eventually the others. And then there's this important line where Stannis says, I realized that if I want to be king, I needed to do the job first. I needed to protect the people, and that would make me king, not just demanding it and taking King's Landing. So George is already giving us that mental puzzle box with Stannis. And Dany is going to have the exact same friggin' choice. And if you think that Stannis is smarter and more noble than Dany, then you're listening to the wrong podcast. There is a different podcast for you whose name we shall not say, but it exists. It's out there. Anyways. Yes. You get the point, though, right? You agree with me, Mel? You think Dany's going to figure this one out?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, really, honestly, we have all of the pieces, and George is supplying us with all of these pieces. He's lining them all up for us and saying, like, look, here are the pieces that Dany is made of. They fit together really nicely. And we could try to jam something else in there, but it's not going to fit. Yeah, I'm definitely on the agreement on this one.
And of course, if you think about Stannis, that's the whole thing that makes him likable. If he had not have done that choice and gone north, then he just would have been he would have been just another one of those rats picking at the woman's body of Westeros in Dany's dream, right? The rat-faced dwarves, I guess is what they were. But Stannis is a little bit better than that. And the fact that he goes north is like, it shows us, like, even though he's got problems and even though he's stiff and all this, like he's trying to do the right thing, even though he's like kind of burning people alive once in a while. Like ultimately he's figuring out a certain thing about kingship that Dany has to think about too. So Stannis is a mixed bag. I like him as a character. But that's the main thing about his character that like speaks for him is that decision. So, yeah. And all right, so next I want to highlight a quick book to show difference. In the show, Dany asks for Missandei to be thrown into the deal in a slightly callous way, and it sort of rubbed me the wrong way when I watched it. But in the books, it's the opposite. It's suggested by the masters. It says, the Unsullied will learn your savage tongue quickly enough but until such time as you need a slave to speak to them, take this one as our gift, a token of a bargain well struck. I shall, said Dany. The slave girl rendered his words to her and hers to him. If she had feelings about being given for a token, she took care not to let them show. So the show doesn't have that. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have that beat of this was very well written to say like Missandei has slave culture like ingrained into her that it doesn't even flash across her face that she just got given away like that. And this is followed up really nicely by Dany's conversation with Missandei later in this chapter. And so when this is, go ahead and read this right here.
Sure. Missandei is no longer a slave. I free you from this instant. Come ride with me in the litter. I wish to talk. Recaro helped them in, and Dany drew the curtains shut against the dust and heat. If you stay with me, you will serve as one of my handmaids, she said as they set off. I shall keep you by my side for me, as you spoke for Kraznys, but you may leave my service whenever you choose. If you have father or mother, you would sooner return to. This one will stay, the girl said. This one, there is no place for me to go. This, I will serve you gladly. I can give you freedom, but not safety, Dany warned. I have a world to cross and wars to fight. You may go hungry. You may grow sick. You may be killed. Valar Morghulis, said Missandei in High Valyrian. All men must die, Dany agreed, but not for a long while. We may pray. She leaned back on the pillows and took the girl's hand.
So just a very tender scene. I don't have any like super deep point here. Just want to show these humanizing moments. This is our first experience with Dany freeing a slave and then seeing how she treats them afterward. So it's just a very good example. And she goes on as later. There's a point where she promises to take Missandei home and says that I hope to see your isle one day. And so I don't. Like I said, I think Dany is going to die against the others, but I hope George gets Missandei back to Nath, or he hits that beat somehow. That would really be nice. Yeah. So we won't talk about the show at all at this point. And
I think after watching the show that all of us who liked Missandei, like we were rooting for the Missandei Grey Worm relationship to work, and then to just like have that crumble and to have Missandei and the way she did was just like, for me, it was really heartbreaking because she was like one of like the purest characters.
Yeah.
Too pure for this.
Pretty sure that one won't be the same. So
I hope not.
All right. So Dany proceeds to ask Missandei more questions about the Unsullied, about how much pain they feel, if they really obey as described. And then she asks a very important question to make sure her plan is going to work, which is, if I did resell them, how would I know they could not be used against me? Would they do that? Fight against me? Even do me harm? If their master commanded, they do not question, your grace. All the questions have been culled from them. They obey. So this is George's last clue to the reader about what's about to happen. Dany is once again asking the question in reverse to disguise her intent. She's really asking, once I buy the Unsullied from the masters, will they obey me if I command them to slay the masters? And Missandei reassures her that yes, once they are yours, and their former owners enjoy no special protection. That's the point here. So that night, she walks up on the deck alone, and Jorah approaches, and Dany voices some of her inner thoughts to him.
Sorry. Do you remember Arrow? She asked him. The Lazarene girl? They were raping her, but I stopped them and took her under my protection. Only when my son and stars was dead, Mago took her back, used her again, and killed her. Aggo said it was her fate. I remember, Sir Jorah said. I was alone for a long time, Jorah. All alone, but for my brother. I was such a small, scared thing. Viserys should have protected me, but instead, he hurt me and scared me worse. He shouldn't have done that. He wasn't just my brother, he was my king. Why do the gods make kings and queens if not to protect the ones who can't protect themselves? Some kings make themselves. Robert did. He was no true king, Dany said scornfully. He did no justice. Justice. That's what kings are for. Sir Jorah had no answer. He only smiled and touched her hair so lightly. It was enough. Creepy Jorah.
Well, in this case, when it says it was enough, what the point is here is that Dany is distilling down to her decision making here, and when she sees Jorah smile and not object to it, that is the confirmation that she's looking for. And so you could almost take this not in a creepy way, but of course it is Jorah.
Still, like, he had to touch her,
Yeah,
had to touch her.
But of course the main point here is, he scared me worse. He shouldn't have done that. He wasn't just my brother. He was my king. Why do the gods make kings and queens if not to protect the ones who can't protect themselves? So this is another one of those lines that you just want to like scream at D&D or like inscribe on a brick and throw through their window or something like, did you read this part or what? So this is probably a good point here to stop and talk about liberation ideology for just a second, because Dany's basically embracing it here. She's saying, well, so here's this quote. I shared it on Twitter today. There is a higher law than the law of government, and that is the law of conscience. And that quote comes from Kwame Ture, born Stokely Carmichael, who was, and I'm quoting this from Wikipedia, prominent American socialist organizer in the civil rights movement in the United States and the global Pan-African movement. Born in Trinidad, he grew up in the United States from the age of 11 and became an activist while attending Howard University, which I've been to, by the way, in DC. I've played my band played a show there actually at Howard University. So he eventually developed the Black Power movement, first while leading the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, called the SNCC, later serving as the honorary prime minister of the Black Panther Party, and lastly as a leader of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And the point of this is to give you the context of where that quote comes from. Kwame Ture was talking about laws in the United States which rendered Black people as less than white people in many ways, when he said that the law of conscience is higher than the law of the government. So said another way, unjust laws are unjust, and there comes a time to disobey them. And ultimately, civil disobedience was one of the key factors to enacting civil rights legislation, thus making the laws of the government more closely aligned with those of conscience. So think about this in the context of Dany's decision to, quote unquote, double cross the good masters. That's the sticking point of her plan. In order to pull it off, she's got to do a little bit of deception regarding Drogon. She sells Drogon to the masters and hands them the handle, but knows full well that he will not come to them and that he'll obey Dany when she says Dracarys. And we've covered the fact that, hey, the masters were foolish here, but still, like, there's a little bit of deception, double crossing that's going on. But Dany doesn't care about the technicalities of trade customs and the laws of slavers. The higher law is that of conscience. And what the slavers do to the boys who become unsullied is written to be very obviously unconscionable. So what Dany's deciding is that if she's going to be a queen, a conqueror, and a dragon lord, that she is going to do justice. And if the laws of man are unjust, then they have to go. And that's what this boils down to here. So I will stop and let you pipe in there.
No, I am 100% on board with it. I'm sorry, I have screaming kids in the background. But yes, it is unjust. Apparently what I'm doing in my house is also unjust. No, I think that making that comparison is very fair. And I like the tie into civil disobedience. And yeah, I think that Dany was faced with a choice. And she, in this case, made the right choice. Like, I think we can, at this point in 2020, all agree that Dany's choice to treat people kindly and treat people equally is the right choice. And it's the choice that we should all be making. And yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, so this is, and again, it's not just again taking the Unsullied, but she's killing the masters. She's going to leave different people in charge. And like I said, we'll probably have to take the discussion of what she does in power to a future one. But the point is that she's if you want to use a metaphor, she is ending the practice of Unsullied root and stem. She is cutting off the whole thing, if you will, ending the. Yeah. I mean, it's right there. So as we are going to the battle, we get another call out to Rhaegar and the Trident. Go ahead and read this one. You're on mute.
I'm sorry. I think there we go. Okay. Today she rode her silver, clad in horsehair pants and painted leather vest, a bronze medallion belt about her waist, and 2 more crossed between her breasts. Irri and Jiki had braided her hair and hung it with a tiny silver bell whose chimes sang of the undying of Karth, burned in their palace of dust. And sorry.
What?
We had a little interjection there.
Oh. Where are we? Sorry, I was looking at the chat.
Oh no, you're fine. There's another call out to Rhaegar and the Trident down below about Dany's banner, and it references the quote about the small folk sewing banners for the Targaryens. Do you want me to go ahead and read that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I ought to have a banner sewn, she thought, as she led her tattered band up along Astapor's meandering river. She closed her eyes to imagine how it would look, all flowing black silk, and on it the 3-headed dragon of the Targaryen, breathing golden flames. A banner such as Rhaegar might have borne. The river's banks were strangely tranquil. The worm, the Astapori called the stream. It was wide and slow and crooked, dotted with tiny wooded islands. She glimpsed children playing on one of them, darting amongst elegant marble statues. On another island, 2 lovers kissed in the shade of tall green trees, with no more shame than Dothraki at a wedding. Without clothing, she could not tell if they were slave or free.
So 2 things here. Rhaegar fought his battle on a river, the Trident, of course. And then here Dany is thinking about heading to battle like Rhaegar did and carrying a banner like he would as she goes by a river. So it's a nice little parallel. And then second, we see that the whole you can't tell rich from poor or slave from free when everyone is naked concept that George also employs at the Water Gardens in Dorne. It's basically just a little reminder of what all this is about: human rights, basic equality. All humans are created equal. You know, George wants us to have this clear in our minds when we watch Dany take action so that we know what this is really about. So we get one last reminder of the cruelty of the slave culture here, even beyond the Unsullied. I'll go ahead and read this one. It's pretty horrible. There were no bronze statues here, only a wooden platform where rebellious slaves were racked and flayed and hanged. The good masters placed them so they will be the first thing a new slave sees upon entering the city, Missandei told her as they came to the plaza. At first glimpse, Dany thought their skin was striped like the Zorses of the Jogos Nye. She rode her silver near and saw that the red flesh beneath the crawling black stripes, flies, and maggots. The rebellious slaves had been peeled like a man might peel an apple in a long curling strip. One man had an arm black with flies from fingers to elbow and red and white beneath. Dany reined him beneath him. What did this one do? He raised a hand against his owner, her stomach roiling. Dany wheeled her silver about and trotted towards the center of the plaza and the army she bought so dear. So basically, Dany is like taking one last glimpse of this horror, and she immediately wheels her horse and she's like, okay, let's do this. These people have to go. You know, it's just that last little beat. Now, Mel, for this penultimate dramatic reading here, I was thinking that you will do the Daenerys lines.
Sure.
And I will read the narration and the 1 or 2 slaver lines.
All right.
We can bring it to.
I think we can make it happen.
Yeah. Are you good right now, or do you have any kids murdering each other in the background? Are you good?
I think we're okay.
Well, I mean, obviously, you never know, can't predict the future, but
I wish I could
okay.
sometimes.
So here it is. Finally, there were no more trade goods to add to the pile. Her Dothraki mounted their horses once more, and Dany said,
"This was all we could carry. The rest awaits you on the ships. A great quantity of amber and wine and black rice. And you have the ships themselves. So all that remains is..."
"The dragon," finished Grazdan with the spiked beard, who spoke the common tongue so thickly. "And here he waits," Sir Jorah, and Yeah, I guess that's a Ser Jorah line. Who knows? So Jorah and Belwas walked beside her to the litter where Drogon and his brothers lay basking in the sun. Oh, that was a Dany line. Let's back it up. Go ahead.
All right. Oops. And here he waits.
Ser Jorah and Belwas walked beside her to the litter where Drogon and his brothers lay basking in the sun. Jiki unfastened one end of the chain and handed it down to her. She gave a yank, and the black dragon raised his head, hissing, and unfolded wings of night and scarlet. Kraznys Monaclaws smiled broadly as their shadow fell across him. He's not very good with foreshadowing, is he? Foreshadowing, get it? Dany handed the slaver the end of Drogon's chain. In return, he presented her with the whip. The handle was black dragon bone, elaborately carved and inlaid with gold. 9 long, thin leather lashes trailed from it, each one tipped by a gilded claw. The gold pommel was a woman's head, with pointed ivory teeth. The harpy's fingers, Kraznys named the scourge. Dany turned the whip in her hand. Such a light thing to bear such weight.
Is it done, then? Do they belong to me?
It is done, he agreed, giving the chain a sharp pull to bring Drogon down from the litter. Dany mounted her silver. She could feel her heart thumping in her chest. She felt desperately afraid. Was this what my brother would have done? She wondered if Prince Rhaegar had been this anxious when he saw the usurper's host formed up across the Trident with all their banners floating on the wind. She stood in her stirrups and raised the harpy's fingers above her head for all the Unsullied to see.
It is done,
She cried at the top of her lungs.
You are mine.
She gave the mare her heels and galloped along the first rank, holding the fingers high.
You are the dragons now. You're bought and paid for. It is done. It is done.
She glimpsed old Grazdan turn his gray head sharply. He hears me speak Valyrian. The other slaves were not listening. The other slavers were not listening. They crowded around Kraznys and the dragon, shouting advice. You can just picture that. It's like, how many slavers does it take to screw in a light bulb? And they're like, no, you got to do this. No, maybe a few. Anyways, so they crowded around Kraznys and the dragon, shouting advice. Though the Astapor yanked and tugged, Drogon would not budge off the litter. Smoke rose gray from his open jaws, and his long neck curled and straightened as she snapped at the slaver's face. It is time to cross the Trident, Dany thought, and she wheeled and rode her silver back. Typo. Dany thought as she wheeled and rode her silver back. Her blood riders moved in close around her.
You are in difficulty.
He will not come, Kraznys said.
There's a reason. A dragon is no slave.
And Dany swept the lash down as hard as she could across the slaver's face. Kraznys screamed and staggered back, the blood running red down his cheeks into his perfumed beard. The harpy's fingers had torn his features half to pieces with one slash, but she did not pause to contemplate the ruin.
Drogon,
she sang out loudly, sweetly, all her fear forgotten.
Dracarys.
The black dragon spread his wings and roared. A lance of swirling dark flame took Kraznys full in the face. His eyes melted and ran down his cheeks, and the oil in his hair and beard burnt so fiercely into the fire that for an instant the slaver wore a burning crown twice as tall as his head. The sudden stench of charred meat overwhelmed even his perfume, and his wail seemed to drown out all other sound. Then the plaza of punishment blew apart in blood and chaos. The good masters were shrieking, stumbling, shoving one another aside, and tripping over the fringes of their tokars in their haste. Drogon flew almost lazily at Kraznys, black wings beating, and he gave the slaver another taste of fire. As he gave the slaver another taste of fire, Irri and Jiki unchained Viserion and Rhaegal, and suddenly there were 3 dragons in the air. When Dany turned to look, a third of Astapor's proud, demon-horned warriors were fighting to stay atop their terrified mounts, and another third were fleeing in a bright blaze of shiny copper. One man kept his saddle long enough to draw a sword, but Jogo's whip coiled around his neck and cut off his shout. Another lost a hand to Rikaro's arak and rode off, reeling and spurting blood. Aggo sat calmly, notching arrows to his bowstring and sending them at tokars. Silver, gold, or plain, he cared nothing for the fringe. Strong Belwas had his arak out as well, and he spun it as he charged. That's you.
Mm-mm. It's an Astapori.
Oh, so it is. Spears, Dany heard one Astapori shout. It was Grazdan, old Grazdan, in his heavy tokar with pearls. Unsullied! Defend us! Stop them! Defend your masters! Spears! Swords! When Ricardo put an arrow through his mouth, the slaves holding his sedan chair broke and ran, dumping him unceremoniously on the ground. The old man crawled to the first rank of eunuchs, his blood pooling on the bricks. The Unsullied did not so much as look down to watch him die. Rank on rank they stood, and did not move. The
gods have heard my prayer. Unsullied!
Dany galloped before them, her silver gold braid flying behind her, her bell chiming with every stride.
Slay the good masters, slay the soldiers, slay every man who wears a tokar or holds a whip, but harm no child under 12, and strike the chains off every slave you see.
She raised the harpy's fingers in the air, and then she flung the scourge aside.
Freedom!
She sang out,
Dracarys! Dracarys!
And then everyone together, Dracarys! They shouted back, the sweetest words she'd ever heard. Dracarys! Dracarys! And all around the slavers ran and sobbed and begged and died, and the dusty air was filled with spears and fire. There we go. Woo!
That was pretty awesome.
That doesn't get any better than that, man.
Freeing the slaves. Oh my gosh.
I like how George keeps putting in this shit about the perfume. Like the smell of burning flesh finally overwhelmed that nasty perfume. Like it's so stinky.
We've all been there in the room with the person that has too much perfume and it's just like.
And yes, shout out to both Mel Gibson, freedom, and also Zach De La Rocha, freedom. Yeah. So all the freedoms. There we go. Pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, we are at 2 hours and 15 minutes, but let's go ahead and tease the conversation that comes next, which is, of course, what comes after this glorious moment, overthrowing the slavers, freeing the Unsullied. She takes Yunkai and moves on to Meereen, and Meereen is where it really gets complicated. And particularly, it's the moment that people were talking about in the chat, where she finds out that there are some slaves that want to sell themselves back into service in Meereen. Now, the thing about that is that it's noted that it's only the well-trained slaves. It's the scribes, it's the teachers, doctors, lawyers.
Exactly.
It's basically, yeah, and I'm going to hand this off to you to talk about the Roman society that we were talking about. But basically, George is modeling this slave culture off of Roman society. And when we first see Astapor, we don't see that as much. We see all these oppressed slaves, and we see these horrific masters. We kill the masters. That seems pretty fun and simple and straightforward. Then as we go to Yunkai and especially Meereen, we learn that their culture is organized in such a way that many roles in society that are respected roles are filled by slaves. And again, this is very much like Roman culture. And so you have scribes and people that are treated well. They're even in Roman times, they're allowed to make money. And well, go ahead and dive in, Melanie.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this was a really interesting comparison to make because, yeah, like you're saying, there was kind of like this subset of slaves that were treated probably better. They lived in circumstances that were much more comfortable than, for example, something that I wanted to bring up was the difference between the slaves that worked in the mines in Valyria and the slaves that are the educated ones that we're talking about right now. In ancient Rome, apparently only the slaves who were considered disobedient or were being punished for some reason were sent to work in mines and do like the really tough menial labor. But the thing is, there are always people who are, who are going to, misbehave or be punished for whatever reason, just or unjust. I think that it bears thinking about the fact that that Dany wants to free them all. I'm sort of getting off the rails here, and I want to keep it tight. The slaves that are treated well are probably going to be in the minority. and the slaves that are, I guess I'm going to say like the hoi polloi, the unwashed masses are going to be probably very grateful for what Dany is doing. And I think part of what makes this whole thing kind of problematic is the fact that as of this moment, we don't see Dany with a plan about what to do with the slaves afterwards. The slave that is complaining, the educated slave that's complaining, is saying like, I want my master to buy me back. But really at the core of what he wants is he just wants that security. And if Dany can come up with some sort of plan or some sort of alternative economy, because slavery is an economy. If Dany can come up with an alternative economy, it would move the thinking from being a slave to being an employee. And yeah,
exactly. The line starts to get blurry when that was perfect. That's exactly what we want to boil this down to. Like when the slaves are asking to sell themselves back to a master, like what is that exactly? Like because the whole point about slavery is that your autonomy as a human is taken away from you and you are owned by somebody else. You don't get to control all your decisions. You can be executed. You can be sold to someone else. But what they're doing is they're saying, I want to sell myself into service because I have these skills and I know I'll be treated well by certain people, highborn lords that need scribes or whatever. So it starts to get a little blurry there. And it at first read, it's easy to be like, oh, well, these people have Stockholm syndrome. They've been slaves and they just want to go back to slavery. That's not actually what's happening here. It's just that the only way that they know how to conceive of the position they had is by calling it slavery. But again, they are a different status than the slaves in the mines or the slaves carrying the sedan chairs or the ones that are made into Unsullied. And this is very, again, similar to Roman society where there are some of the higher up slaves were better off than some of the poorer citizens as far as their standards of living and the food that they eat. Some of the highborn slaves were allowed to make money, and none of that is apologizing for slavery. Obviously, we've moved on beyond that as a global culture. We don't even do versions of slavery anymore. But what's important is to understand the through lines of the economy and the society that exists here in Slaver's Bay. And that is why Dany is dealing with these problems after overthrowing these cities and overthrowing the masters, is because like there needs to be an economy to take place. And this is the big criticism, obviously. She's 15, whatever. But if you topple a power structure, it's kind of like a you break it, you bought it kind of a thing. And to Dany's credit, she at least realizes that. The end of this book ends with her deciding to stay in Meereen. And she is being very hard on herself. She's saying, I have made a mess. I have brought blood and fire everywhere. I don't even know if I did the right thing. And she did do the right thing, but she's being very hard on herself. She feels bad about the chaos that she's caused. And she's basically saying, I can't just sail on to Westeros. I need to stay here and try to stabilize the situation. I don't want it to be like Astapor, where I left 3 people in charge, walked down the road, and they got killed right away.
Exactly. Yes. Yes, I think, and that, that's another nod to what an amazing character Dany is. The fact that she saw what happened in Astapor, learned from it, grew, and doesn't want to repeat her mistakes. Because unlike the D&D version of Dany, who just like is out to kill everybody, Dany truly cares, and she wants to set these people up with a new way to find security and protection and comfort. And yeah, she's not trying to just, oh, well, I freed you, now there you go. She's taking it to heart. She's thinking about these things deeply. And yeah, I really hope that we get a little bit more of that in the Winds of Winter, like what her decision ultimately is considering Meereen.
Yeah, I mean, she's coming back to Meereen, so we're going to see that whole plot line is not wrapped up yet. Yeah. So let me clean up, I think, a wrong impression that I just gave. Karsnark is rightly pointing out that human slavery does exist. You could say that it is an all-time high. I'm not sure where that research comes from, but he's saying there are literally open-air slave markets in Africa and the Middle East. So there's a lot of things going on. There's human trafficking. There are, if you look at the conditions that undocumented immigrants work under in some of the southern states in those strawberry fields, they're living in little shacks without clean water or health care. there's a lot of blurry lines as far as human misery and autonomy. Like, well, you know, that you chose to cross the border and come work in the strawberry field. Yeah, but you are fleeing what? You know, a war-torn place where you couldn't feed your family. And why is it war-torn? Well, because powers that be in the world are fighting over resources and things like that, and government corruption. So yes, I definitely didn't mean to say that slavery doesn't exist anymore. What I mean is that our values as a society, and maybe I'm speaking more of quote unquote first world countries, but we agree human rights are broadly agreed upon across the world. They're not upheld across the world, but we all recognize the idea that slavery is wrong. Whereas in the ancient world, slavery was accepted by basically decent people, by common people. They just accepted that is how our economy functions. We no longer accept that as an acceptable, like we believe in democracy and stuff like that. Now, that's not to say that, like I said, that's upheld everywhere. And I really was thinking a little bit, Melanie, about just what I said about the undocumented immigrants in this country and in other countries in Europe and some of the situations they end up in, where it's like, is that slavery? Is it wage, like work debtage? Like it's a pretty gray area, you know?
It's interesting that you say that, because I, miles away, was having a really similar thought. I mean, you know, the kind of, I was thinking about it in terms of like minimum wage and poverty level living.
Yep.
And how that really is a kind of enslavement, because if you're living at or below, or even really kind of like near the poverty level, you're trapped in a place where you just can't get ahead. You can't, you can't build up a savings. So if something bad happens, you have nothing there to, make it so that you can overcome that, like medical bills or things like that. Chances are you don't have medical insurance. There's a whole, I think a lot of you probably know that there's like this whole plethora of problems that come from the lack of social services that we have right now in the United States. And I was just thinking about how similar to slavery some employment, actually is. And it kind of made me really sad.
Yeah, and then there's, of course, even things like private prisons and prison labor, which is basically straight up slavery. It just is. So there's definitely, we're definitely not like, have rose-colored glasses here. But like I said, what I'm talking about is the slow arc of justice that Martin Luther King talks about. Gradually over time, we raise the standards of what is supposedly right and wrong. Broadly speaking, it waves and ebbs and flows and all that stuff. But so now that we've rounded out that picture to be a little more complete, that is, like I said, we'll probably have to leave it here and tease the rest of this conversation for A Dance with Dragons. This really is the A Dance with Dragons conversation. Is like her ruling in Meereen, dealing with the fallout, having a plan for replacing power structure, how she deals with all that. So I'll grab a couple of things from the last couple chapters of Storm that we sort of glossed over here and wrap those in with The Dance with Dragons. And it's very complex. It's fun to talk about. And yeah, slay the masters, right?
Yeah.
You have some closing thoughts you would like to add?
No, I think that our discussion that we just did were pretty much my closing thoughts. I guess I'm just going to repeat that I think that D&D did Dany dirty. Wow, that had a lot of D's, so much alliteration there. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how George is going to treat her differently, because I think that once you build up a character like Dany, you're not just going to throw it all out the window and be like, oh, no, sorry, I wanted to line up with what the show did because it did that before me. Like, no, that's not going to happen. I just can't live with that possibility.
Their logic is kind of boiled down in that horrible Tyrion speech of like, well, she killed a bunch of evil people and we clapped, and now she's killing all the good people. So joke's on you. No. I think that encapsulates the failure to understand, well, a lot of things. But Daenerys' arc specifically, human nature, justice, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, like you said, you don't create a character like this, have them go through all these lessons to have them get to their climactic moment and then just torpedo all of it. Like it doesn't.
Yeah,
that's not
like throw away all that work. Ugh.
it's not good writing, and it's that George is a good writer, and as you can see where this is going. You can see, and this also, the end of this book begins her real draconic navel gazing, if you will, where she really considers, am I the mother of monsters? What have I done? Yeah. What am I doing with these dragons? You know, and it's the very fact that she worries about all that shit should tell you that she's not just going to flip a switch and be like, kill them all, you know? So
totally agree.
Because if you look at Aerys and the way that he got to the place where he was ready to burn them all, it happened over a long time. He was crazy and cruel for years and years and years. And by the time he got to the point where he gave that command, it was perfectly understandable that he did that. But this is not the making of another Aerys that we're looking at here.
No, I don't think so. Should we just have some fun and talk about? We had talked a little bit about Jon coming back wrong. We're thinking about Jon coming back wrong. Okay, so in the show, basically what they're trying to show is like Dany suddenly like going crazy. And who has the opportunity to do that? Jon does, because he's coming back. He's been he's set up for that. We probably can figure out that he's going to get resurrected. Who knows what system of resurrection is going to be used? Who knows what kind of effect that's going to have on his brain or any of his bodily systems? What if Jon comes back wrong? And what if it's Dany's? What if Dany does fall in love with him but finds out that he is flawed in a way that she can't fix? And instead of that horrific, just like, I love you, like, I'm going to stab you in the heart scene that I hate so much. What if it's the other way around and it's really painful but necessary for Dany to kill Jon? I don't know. I just like thinking about it.
I think Jon's range of possibilities are something like what you're talking about to the Cold Hands ending, where he's so messed up that he can't reintegrate into the world of the living, and he ends his days wandering the north, like we saw on the show, but not as a happy person chilling with the wildlings, but as the new Cold Hands. So
not getting a life of peace. Like it would be really. We were talking about Dany freeing the slaves, and it would be really interesting if oh my gosh, it would be really interesting if Jon ended up as the one taking on that burden and sort of like selflessly being enslaved to his own honor or duty or whatever he feels like he needs to have at that moment.
Yeah, but it's just, once again, like we were talking about with Tyrion, the people around Dany, it's just the whole dynamic is different from what they did in the show. Jon's going to be like kind of crazy and wolfish and maybe unstable, and he might have some of that anger that Beric has over being resurrected. And Tyrion is going to be, you know, he wants to rape and kill his sister. That's like the thing. It's like his mantra, you know, besides where do whores go, is like, I want to rape and kill my sister. So like, that's the Tyrion that we're going to get. He's focused on revenge on Cersei, and he'll probably encourage Dany to be violent.
Yes, I agree. I definitely agree that Tyrion is going to be the one who encourages Dany to be violent. I think that's...
And a final super chat of the day, Elliot. Oh gosh. Elliot says, actually, no, that's not what Elliot says. Elliot says, George compares Dany to people like Joan of Arc, Henry Tudor, and Alexander the Great. I hate when people call her a Nazi or a fascist. Well, of course, if people call her that, they call her that because the show tried to make her into that. But that doesn't fit any of the character that's come before. Even the show character that they made more imperious and demanding still didn't fit. So yeah, she's, you know, those comparisons are apt. And that's probably some good history even to get into maybe in the next episode or two, is look up some Joan of Arc stuff. So yeah, I saw that article. That was really cool. Thank you.
I'm just laughing at Alicia Kingston's comment that Jon's going to channel his inner Shaggy dog and go wild. Oh.
Shaggy. Original bombastic. Okay. All right. Okay, guys. Well, thank you very much for coming. And
thank you.
Watch my Rhaegar show video if you haven't already. And I'll be back in 2 weeks to talk more about all this stuff. And Quinn has agreed to join me. So we'll be there to talk Dance with Dragons. And yeah, it's not okay to own people. It is okay to kill slavers. I'm planting my flags. It's like if you heard nothing else. But thank you for joining me, Melanie.
My pleasure.
Would you like to plug your YouTube channel?
My my very sad YouTube channel, sure. You can find me on YouTube at MelanieLot7, and there is one thing on there, and someday there's going to be more. Someday, I swear it.
Teeny tiny. It's just teeny tiny.
It's so small.
But it's got a couple good videos on there. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks. I see all the thank yous in the chat there. So thanks, guys.
Thank you guys for showing up.
Yep. And well, thank you for bringing the bird. The bird was the big hit.
Sorry.
It helped build our audience up to about 100 there.
Great.
Little seat behind the scenes. Melanie probably has some bird poop on the back of her shirt. But,
I totally have bird poop on. Yeah. Like right there. You can see it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's a risk.
The only thing about bird poop I will say is that bird poop does not smell like cat and dog shit.
Not at all.
So that is the nice thing about it. But
so
on that note, see you guys later.